Tonight, we're breaking down the complete history of legendary Pokémon. This is a captivating topic, but I'll keep my narration calm to ensure you can still drift off to sleep. Thank you to those of you who've been joining us consistently. If you're falling asleep with us tonight, let me know in the comments how many nights in a row you've been here, and if this is your first night, just comment night 1. Now back to the video. Imagine a world where the ground beneath your feet isn't just rock and soil, but the slumbering back of a titan that once dragged the continents into place. Imagine looking at the rain and seeing not a weather pattern, but the tears of a primordial sea god locked in an eternal struggle with the personification of the earth itself. In the world of Pokémon, these aren't just fairy tales told to children to explain the unknown. They are the recorded history of a universe defined by entities of unfathomable power. We often call them legendaries, but that single word struggles to contain what they truly are. They are the architects of space and time, the guardians of life and death, and the scars left behind by ancient wars that nearly leveled the world. To understand the history of legendary Pokémon is to understand the very fabric of reality within this franchise. It is a journey that begins in a void of nothingness and ends in the modern day, where humanity attempts to harness these cosmic forces through science and ambition. The mystery of the legendary Pokémon is perhaps the most enduring part of the series. When we first stepped into the Kanto region decades ago, the concept was simple. There were rumors of rare birds living in the corners of the world, and whispers of a psychic entity created in a lab that had escaped into the darkness of a cave. Back then, they were anomalies, powerful, rare, but still seemingly part of the natural order. But as we moved from region to region, the scale shifted. We realized that these weren't just rare animals, they were the pillars of the world. We moved from the elemental birds of Kanto to the mythic protectors of Johto, where we learned that a Pokémon could die in a fire and be resurrected by a rainbow-colored deity as a manifestation of the lightning, the wind, and the rain. We saw the scope expand further in Hoenn, where the very climate was dictated by the moods of ancient leviathans. And then we reached Sinnoh, where the curtain was pulled back entirely to reveal a hierarchy of gods. We were introduced to the idea of an original one, a being that existed before there was a before, who shaped the universe with 1,000 arms. Its evolution of lore creates a fascinating tension. On one hand, we have the in-universe mythology, the stories passed down through generations of humans who looked at the sky or the sea and saw something divine. On the other hand, we have the real-world history of a franchise that has spent nearly 30 years layering myth upon myth, building a complex tapestry that connects ancient ruins to high-tech laboratories. To truly grasp this history, we have to look at these beings not just as high-level entries in a Pokédex, but as the central characters in a multi-millennial drama. We have to ask ourselves, what does it mean for a world to have a physical manifestation of time walking its fields? What happens to a civilization when its ideals and truths literally split into two dragons and go to war? The stakes of this history are nothing less than the survival of the planet itself. Time and again, the legendary Pokémon have been the catalysts for near-apocalyptic events. We've seen the darkest day in Galar, an extraterrestrial disaster that threatened to consume all energy. We've seen the ultimate weapon in Kalos, fueled by the life force of a legendary stag and a cocoon of destruction. We've seen the fabric of dimensions tear apart in Sinnoh and Alola. These aren't just background details. They are the moments that define the human experience in the Pokémon world. The people of these regions don't just live alongside Pokémon, they live in the shadow of giants. Their architecture, their religions, and their very survival are dictated by their relationship with these legendary figures. But beneath the grand battles and the cosmic stakes, there is a deeper mystery. Why do these beings exist in the first place? Are they biological organisms that simply evolved to a point of godhood, or are they something else entirely, sentient expressions of the universe's fundamental laws? Why is it that a child with a Pokéball can capture the creator of time? The games often leave these questions unanswered, hidden in the flavor text of ancient items or the cryptic dialogue of elderly NPCs in remote villages. They invite us to be archaeologists and philosophers, piecing together a shattered history from the ruins of the Abyssal Ruins or the inscriptions of the Sinnoh ruins. As we embark on this chronological journey through every region and every myth, we aren't just looking at a list of names. We are tracing the lineage of a universe. We will see how the local legends of a burning tower in Ecruteak City eventually gave way to the interdimensional horrors of ultraspace. We will explore how the concept of legendary has shifted from exceptionally rare to cosmically essential. We will look at the trios, the duos, and the singular deities that maintain the balance of nature, and we will examine the human cost of trying to control them. From the icy peaks of the Crown Tundra to the depths of the great crater of Paldea, the history of legendary Pokémon is a story of wonder, terror, and the eternal struggle between the forces of nature and the reach of human curiosity. The world of Pokémon is much older and much stranger than it appears on the surface. It is a place where the sun and moon are more than just celestial bodies. They are travelers from another dimension. It is a place where a sword and a shield aren't just tools, but the forgotten heroes of a forgotten age. Tonight, we peel back the layers of these myths. We look past the stats and the movesets to find the heart of the legend. We are going to walk through the fire, the flood, and the void to see how these legendary beings shaped everything we know about the world of Pokémon. Prepare yourself for a journey across every generation, every region, and every ancient secret. This is the definitive history of the legends that started it all. What makes a Pokémon a legend? Is it the sheer power it possesses? The impossibility of finding another of its kind? Or is it something far less tangible? A feeling that this creature belongs not just to the world, but to the story of that world itself. The games have never given us a single clean rule written in stone. There is no entry in the Pokédex that simply says, this Pokémon is legendary. And yet, from the very first generation, players understood that some Pokémon were different. They felt like myth. They carried an aura, and over the course of nearly 3 decades, that aura has grown from a simple whisper into a symphony of cosmic consequences. Let's start with the most basic question a biologist might ask. What separates a legendary Pokémon from a standard one? In the games, the technical criteria are surprisingly vague. You cannot breed most of them. They are almost always encountered exactly once per save file, often at the climax of a story, locked behind a puzzle or a battle of immense scale. Their base stats are higher than average, sometimes overwhelmingly so. But if you look closely, you will find exceptions. Feony, for example, can breed and produce more Phione. Yet it is still considered a mythical Pokémon by many, and some legendary Pokémon, like the legendary birds in Generation 1, can appear multiple times in certain games. The line is blurry. The definition, in the end, depends more on how the game treats the creature in its lore and narrative than on a strict mechanic. That lore has evolved dramatically. In the earliest games, rarity was enough. Articuno, Zapdos and Moltres were powerful, hidden, and each one felt like a trophy from a journey's edge. They were unique encounters, but they were not yet cosmic deities. They were not creators of worlds or arbiters of time. They were simply the strongest birds you could find, and that was enough. Then Generation 2 introduced Ho-Oh and the legendary beasts, and with them came a story. The Burned Tower, the 3 Pokémon that perished in the fire, and the rainbow-winged Pokémon that revived them. Suddenly, a legendary was not just a rare creature, it was the center of a myth. It had a past. It had purpose. From there, the franchise transitioned from unique encounters to cosmic deities with breathtaking speed. Generation 3 gave us Groudon, Kyogre and Rayquaza, beings that literally controlled the land and sea and sky. Generation 4 introduced the literal creators of time, space and antimatter. Generation 5 told a story of a single dragon that split into 3 because of a human argument over truth and ideals. Generation 6 brought life and death personified, tied to a devastating war and a weapon of ultimate destruction. Generation 7 looked to the stars and introduced beings from another dimension. Generation 8 gave us an alien meteor that caused a global disaster, and Generation 9, Paldea, tied its legend to a deep crater and a phenomenon that seemed to bridge the ancient and the modern. Each generation added a new layer to the mythology, but they did not erase the earlier layers. Instead, they reinterpreted them, making the older legends feel like fragments of a larger tapestry. Others are now fully revealed, so how do we, as fans and scholars of this universe, make sense of it all? We can rely on 3 pillars that support every legendary story the franchise has ever told. The first pillar is in-game dialogue. The characters you meet, the elders in villages, the scientists in labs, the champions who guide you, all of them have something to say about the legends of their region. Their words are not always reliable, but that is the point. They are telling you what they believe, what their culture has passed down. The second pillar is the Pokédex entries. These are the closest thing we have to an official encyclopedia of the Pokémon world, but they are written by people, and they sometimes conflict with one another. One entry might call a Pokémon a destroyer, while another says it brings life. This contradiction is not a mistake. It is a reflection of the fact that these creatures are beyond simple classification. The third pillar is the cinematic adaptations, the movies. The movies often take the skeleton of the game lore and flesh it out into a full narrative, sometimes adding details that were never in the games. They give us a visual and emotional understanding that no text can fully capture. Together, these three pillars give us a rich, layered, and sometimes contradictory picture of what legendary Pokémon truly are. And yet, even with all that, the core question remains elusive. What makes a Pokémon legendary? Perhaps the answer is that a legendary Pokémon is one whose story is bigger than its stats. It is a creature that defines a region's identity, that shapes its history, that is worshipped or feared or studied by the people who live there. It is a being that exists at the intersection of biology and mythology, and in truth, the very first region ever introduced, Kanto, set the stage for this entire framework, even if no one knew it at the time. Which brings us to the next chapter. The Kanto Foundations are where it all began, where the idea of a legendary Pokémon was first planted, and where we can trace the origins of every cosmic deity, an ancient guardian that followed, and that idea of what makes a Pokémon legendary. The elusive criteria, the shift from simple rarity to cosmic mythology, it didn't emerge fully formed. It was built layer by layer, starting with a region that knew nothing of creation, trios, or ancient wars. Kanto. The first games asked us to explore a world where extraordinary creatures existed not as deities to be worshipped, but as forces of nature to be discovered, studied, and sometimes caught. Three of the most iconic figures from that era, Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres, embody this original grounded approach. They weren't gods, they were phenomena. Consider the places where they hide. Seafoam Islands, the power plant, Victory Road. These aren't temples or shrines in the human-built sense. There is no altar, no ancient inscription dedicating the cavern to a winged titan. Yet the game design treats them as sacred spaces nonetheless. Natural cathedrals, carved by the very elements the birds represent. Seafoam Islands is a labyrinth of ice, a frozen maze where the coldest air settles into a permanent, unnatural chill. Walk through its corridors and you feel the weight of the sea above, the pressure of stone and water, and at the heart of it all, Articuno is in a chamber of eternal frost. It is not guarded by puzzles or locks, but by the environment itself. The cold is the guardian. The power plant tells a different story. An abandoned facility, gutted and silent, its machinery long since fallen into disrepair. Yet something hums through the wires. A static charge that builds in the air, a flicker of light in the corners of your vision. Zapdos has made this place its roost, drawn not to worship or ritual but to the raw energy that still leaks from the generators. It is a creature of thunder, and a place that once channeled electricity calls to it like a beacon. The power plant becomes a shrine not because humans consecrated it, but because a legendary being chose it as its nest. And then Victory Road. The final test before the Pokémon League, a volcanic tunnel carved through the heart of a mountain. Here the heat is oppressive, the rock rough and sharp. Moltres waits in a chamber that glows with an orange, almost living light. The flames that dance along its wings are not mere decoration. They shape the very atmosphere of that cave, raising the temperature, creating a microclimate where only fire can thrive. Victory Road is a pilgrimage route for trainers, but for Moltres it is simply home, a place where its elemental fire can burn undisturbed. These three locations form the first shrines of the Pokémon world, but they are shrines to natural phenomena, not to gods. The birds do not govern the universe. They do not create or destroy worlds. They simply exist as rare, powerful expressions of ice, thunder, and flame. The mystery of Seafoam Island's power plant and Victory Road is that they function as sacred spaces without needing a myth to justify them. The game trusts you to feel the reverence yourself. This is where the subtle world building of the bird trio's influence on the regional ecosystem becomes important. Kanto is not a land shaped by cosmic battles or legendary wars, yet the presence of these three Pokémon leaves an imprint. Sailors speak of sudden squalls near the islands where Articuno roosts. Farmers in the shadows of the power plant report irregular lightning strikes, even on clear days. The volcanic slopes around Victory Road are barren, scorched not by ordinary lava, but by the residual heat of Moltres' passage. These are not global catastrophes. They are local, almost intimate effects. The ecosystem adapts. Trainers learn to watch the weather, and that is exactly the point. In Kanto, legendaries are not the architects of reality. They are its rare, wild inhabitants. They are elemental forces that can be encountered, battled, and captured, if you are bold enough to venture into their hidden domains. There is no elaborate creation story behind them, no moral lesson about truth or ideals. They are simply there, waiting, as much a part of the world as the tall grass and the ocean currents. The bird trio set a template that would echo through the generations. Later trios would carry the same structure, opposites, balances, a mediator, but they would be burdened with mythologies about time and space, life and death, truth and ideals. Kanto's trio remains pure. They are what they are, and that purity makes them mystifying, almost more legendary for their lack of explanation. But not all legendaries in Kanto were content to remain hidden in caves. One was created, not born. One was engineered by human hands and human ambition, a being that would become the first true manufactured myth. That story, the Mewtwo Incident, would redefine what a legendary could be, and it is the subject of our next chapter. The legendary birds of Kanto, those first rare encounters at Seafoam Islands and the power plant, were treated as natural phenomena, forces of weather and elemental power that a trainer might stumble upon almost by accident. They were not worshipped in those early games, not yet woven into the fabric of creation myths. They were simply rare, powerful, and wild. But beneath the surface of those first adventures, something far darker was already taking shape, something that would redefine the very meaning of the word legendary. It would not be born from a volcano or a frozen cavern. It would be born from a laboratory, from human ambition reaching for divinity, and from a moral collapse that left a scar on the island of Sinnoh. To understand the Mewtwo Incident, we have to go back to the creature that made it possible, a Pokémon so elusive that for decades it was considered nothing more than a ghost story by the scientific community. That Pokémon is Mew. Its official designation in the Pokédex records is the new species Pokémon, yet it is anything but new. Mew is the phantom ancestor, the biological root of the entire species. When researchers at the Sinnoh Island laboratory began studying ancient DNA from the jungle, they found a genetic template that seemed to predate all known Pokémon forms. It was as if they had unearthed the common ancestor, the original source code from which all other Pokémon had branched over millions of years. Mew itself had never been captured, never even photographed in the wild, yet its genetic signature was unmistakable. And that signature held a terrible promise: the power to replicate any Pokémon's moveset, the ability to alter its own biology at will. To the Sinnoh team, this was not a creature to be revered. It was a resource. The project began quietly, funded by the same corporation that ran the Pokémon Mansion on the island. There was no official announcement, no ethical review board. The scientists extracted the genetic material from a fossilized eyelash of Mew. This detail is recorded in the logs and began the process of artificial creation. They were not trying to resurrect Mew, they were trying to surpass it. Their goal was to create the ultimate life form, a Pokémon with intelligence and power far beyond anything nature had ever produced. They called the project Mewtwo, and they believed they were on the verge of a breakthrough that would change the world. But the logs, later leaked and pieced together by investigative journalists and historians, reveal a story of arrogance and escalating desperation. The early attempts failed. The first clones were unstable, their cellular structures collapsing under the weight of their own modified genes. The scientists grew frustrated. They pushed harder, introducing human DNA into the splicing process, hoping to stabilize the embryo with traits of cognition and ambition. This was the moment the project crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. They were no longer creating a Pokémon. They were forging a living weapon, a being engineered to think, to feel, and eventually to question. And when the embryo finally took hold, when the creature began to grow in its containment tank, the logs describe a moment of hushed awe. It was not a baby. It was something that looked almost like a fully formed Pokémon, with eyes that held a terrible awareness from the very first day. The ethical collapse at Sinnoh Island was not a single event. It was a slow erosion of conscience. The lead researcher, a man known in the records only as Dr. Fuji, had once been a compassionate scientist. He had dedicated his earlier career to the study of Pokémon habitats and the preservation of rare species. but the pursuit of the ultimate life form consumed him. The logs show him writing about Mewtwo as if it were both his child and his experiment. He spoke to it through the glass wall of its chamber. He tried to teach it to respond, but the creature felt only pain. The containment field that kept it alive also isolated it from any natural contact. It was never allowed to feel the sun or touch the earth, and as its psychic powers bloomed, it began to sense the fear of its creators, the guilt embedded in their silence. That feedback loop of anxiety and confinement turned its developing mind toward rage. The incident itself was brief but catastrophic. On the day of its final assessment, Mewtwo shattered the walls of its prison, with a burst of telekinetic force that registered on seismographs across the island. It did not kill anyone, not at first. It simply walked out of the laboratory, its gaze sweeping across the terrified staff. It saw the cages of other Pokémon, the experiments, the failed clones, and in that moment it understood the scope of the atrocity. It had been created for one purpose, to be the strongest, and now it had no purpose at all, so it fled. It tore a hole in the ceiling of the mansion and escaped into the storm that was brewing over Cinnabar Island. The research facility was abandoned. The government of Kanto classified the entire incident. Dr. Fuji was never seen again, but Mewtwo did not disappear into the wilderness. It found a cave deep beneath Cerulean City, a place that would later be known as the Unknown Dungeon, and there it waited, isolated, tormented by its own existence. It had no origin story like the legendary birds. It had no mythic role assigned by ancient cultures. It was a product of modern sin, a legend born from a single act of hubris. And in its isolation, it made a decision. If it could not be part of the natural world, it would remake the world in its own image. It would create its own kin, its own version of Mew's lineage, a new species built from its own will. That ambition would lead to one of the most chilling chapters in Pokémon history, a story that unfolds not in the mainstream games but in the cinematic lore and in the shadow of the first movie. The Mewtwo Incident is the dark side of Pokémon history made manifest. It is a cautionary tale about what happens when we treat life as a product, when we mistake intelligence for obedience, and it forces us to re-examine the very definition of a legendary Pokémon. Mewtwo is not a god. It is not a natural force. It is a reflection of us, of our capacity for cruelty and our hunger for control. Its existence is a wound that has never fully healed in the lore of the Kanto region, and as the decades passed, as other regions built their own legends around creation and war and cosmic balance, the story of Cinnabar Island remained a quiet warning. The ultimate life form does not bless us, it judges us. That judgment would eventually find a new stage in the Johto region, where the burned tower of Ecruteak City held a story of death and resurrection, of 3 Pokémon who had been lost and then reborn by a single act of grace. The tale of Hoenn and the legendary beasts would offer a different kind of origin, one rooted not in laboratories but in fire and faith, and it would raise a question that still lingers. Is a legend born from tragedy any less sacred than one born from creation? We will explore that question in the next chapter, as we travel to Johto and step into the ashes of the burned tower. From the ashes of Cinnabar Island, from the moral wreckage of the Mewtwo Incident, the Pokémon world began to ask a deeper question. If humanity could twist life into a weapon, what else had we misunderstood about the creatures that shared our world? The answer would not be found in a laboratory or a secret diary. It would be found in a much older story, whispered through the fog of an ancient region called Johto. Here, in a city named Ecruteak, the very meaning of what it meant to be legendary would shift. It would move away from the clinical rarity of a Kanto bird or the manufactured terror of a clone and towards something far more profound, mythology. And the first stones of that myth were laid centuries ago, when 2 towers rose against the sky. Ecruteak City was once a place of profound connection. It was built around 2 great structures, the Brass Tower to the east and the Bell Tower to the west. These were not simply landmarks. They were living symbols of a covenant between humans and Pokémon. The Brass Tower was said to be a place where Pokémon would gather to rest. Drawn by an energy that hummed through its copper and iron frames, the Bell Tower, by contrast, was a place of ritual and reverence. Its bells were not just for sound, they were meant to call the sky itself. And at the heart of these towers was a story that transformed the way people saw the rare beings around them. Because here, in Ecruteak, the line between a rare animal and a cultural icon began to blur. The towers were not built in worship of gods, they were built as invitations. a place where humans and Pokémon could meet halfway, where a bond between the two could be forged, not through battle, but through coexistence. The transition from rare animals to cultural icons is nowhere more visible than in the history of Ecruteak City. In Kanto, legends were treated as isolated phenomena, a bird frozen in sea foam, a creature born from a meteor. But in Johto, the legendary Pokémon were woven into the fabric of the city itself. They were not anomalies. They were protectors. The city's architecture, its festivals, its very identity, revolved around the belief that certain Pokémon were guardians of the land, not just creatures to be caught. This shift is crucial because it marks the moment when the franchise stopped treating legendary Pokémon as mere collectibles and started treating them as anchors of meaning. The Brass Tower and the Bell Tower were not just buildings. They were a story that the people of Ecruteak told themselves to explain why the world felt balanced. Because above the towers, a great bird watched over the sky, and beneath the waves, another kept the sea in check. That great bird was Ho-Oh, and its counterpart was Lugia. Ho-Oh was said to fly across the skies of Johto, its seven-coloured tail illuminating the clouds. It was not a creature of combat, it was a creature of renewal. Legend held that if you saw Ho-Oh, your heart would be filled with joy, and the world would seem whole again. But Ho-Oh was not a god, in the sense that later legends would become. It was a guardian, a silent overseer. Its role was to maintain the bond between earth and sky, between human and Pokémon. And then there was Lugia. While Ho-Oh watched the heavens, Lugia dwelled in the depths of the sea. It was said that a single flap of Lugia's wings would cause a storm that would last for 40 days. But it was not a destroyer, it was a keeper. It kept the balance of the ocean in check, preventing the forces of nature from spiraling into chaos. Together, Ho-Oh and Lugia represented a fundamental truth, that the world was held together by forces that were powerful but not malevolent. They were guardians, not tyrants. This was the shift that Johto introduced to the Pokémon mythos. The transition from rare animals to cultural icons meant that legendary Pokémon were no longer just powerful outliers. They were the embodiment of harmony. The Brass Tower and the Bell Tower were not monuments to conquest. They were symbols of a partnership that had existed long before humans learned to build laboratories and create weapons. But as with all ancient stories, there was a turning point, a moment when the harmony broke, and that moment would be marked by a fire that consumed the Brass Tower, killing 3 Pokémon who had taken shelter inside. And it would be Ho-Oh itself, the guardian of the sky, who would descend to offer a second chance. That story, the resurrection at the burned tower, would redefine everything. It would give birth to 3 legendary beasts who would roam Johto for centuries, searching for a heart that was pure. And it would turn the question of what it means to be legendary into something far more personal, far more fragile than any cosmic creation myth. But that part of the tale must wait for another night, because before we can follow the beasts, we must understand the fire. And the fire began not as a tragedy, but as a breach of trust, a breach that would ultimately lead to the most haunting chapter in the history of legendary Pokémon. The resurrection at the burned tower. We left off in Ecruteak City, a place where history is etched into every stone and every story passed down through generations. The Brass Tower and the Bell Tower stood as monuments to a time when humans and Pokémon lived in harmony, a golden age that seemed almost too perfect to last, and it didn't last. That harmony was shattered by a fire so fierce it consumed not just wood and metal, but the fragile trust between people and the creatures they revered. The Great Fire of Ecruteak is not just a footnote in Johto's history. It is the defining scar that transformed the region's mythology from a simple tale of coexistence into a legend of loss and rebirth. What happened in the flames of the Brass Tower is central to understanding how the legendaries of Johto came to be, and why they feel so different from the static guardians of Kanto. The tower that once stood as a symbol of unity became a funeral pyre. 3 Pokémon were trapped inside that burning structure, We know nothing of their names, their species, or their lives before that day. They are unnamed, unremembered, and that is perhaps the cruelest part of the tragedy of the nameless Pokémon who perished in the Great Fire, is that they are forever eclipsed by the beings they became. They were ordinary creatures, not legendary in any sense, caught in a disaster that was not of their making, and as the tower collapsed, so did the last hope for their survival. But fire does not always destroy. Sometimes it forges something new. From the ashes of that catastrophe, a single figure descended. Ho-Oh, the rainbow-winged Pokémon, had long been a guardian of the bell tower, a symbol of the skies and of renewal. When it saw the devastation below, it did not simply mourn, it acted. Ho-Oh's intervention transformed the tragedy into a miracle. But it was not a simple act of resurrection. The three fallen Pokémon were not brought back as they were. They were reborn, reforged into embodiments of the disaster that claimed them. The lightning strike that set the tower ablaze became Raikou, a beast of pure thunder and fury. The fire itself became Entei, a volcano of living flame. The rain that finally extinguished the inferno became Suicune, a creature of northern winds and cleansing waters. These three were not given new lives, they were given new purposes. They became the legendary beasts of Johto, each one a permanent echo of the Great Fire. O did not erase the tragedy, it immortalized it. And then they left. Unlike the legendary birds of Kanto, who were content to nest in caves and power plants, the beasts could not stay in one place. They roamed the entire region of Johto, driven by a restless energy that mirrored the chaos of their origin. This is what made them so different from every legendary that came before. They were not guardians of a specific shrine or protectors of a single mountain. They were wanderers, chasing a memory they could never forget. For players of the original Gold and Silver games, this created a new kind of hunt. The beasts were not waiting for you at the end of a dungeon. They were hiding in tall grass, appearing and disappearing at random, forcing you to chase them across the entire map. The roamer mechanic was born, and with it a profound change in how we experienced legendary Pokémon. This was no longer about solving a puzzle or defeating a boss. This was about the pursuit of a myth. The hunt for Raikou, Entei, and Suicune mirrored the very feeling of chasing something that can never be fully caught, a legend that exists only in glimpses, in footsteps on grass, in the flutter of a wing before it's gone. Every time you stepped into a new route, there was a chance the beast had moved. Every time you used a repel, you held your breath. The game made you feel like a true legend seeker, not a conqueror. And in that chase, you were participating in a story that was thousands of years old. The people of Ecruteak had never stopped waiting for the beasts to return. They believed that one day, a trainer worthy enough would finally prove that the bond between humans and Pokémon could be restored. The resurrection at the burned tower was not just an origin story for three powerful creatures. It was a statement about what legends are supposed to be. They are not trophies to be collected. They are forces of nature shaped by loss, by hope, by the stubborn refusal of memory to fade. And as Ho-Oh flew away from the ruins, leaving only ashes and three new gods behind, the people of Johto understood that the Golden Age was gone. But in its place, something deeper had taken root. A story that would be told for centuries, a story that would eventually reach far beyond the borders of Johto, into a new land where the very forces of the earth itself would rise to challenge the balance of the world. The tragedy of the burned tower had given Ho-Oh a purpose, and with it, the legendary beasts were born. But as the Johto region settled into its quiet equilibrium, something far grander was brewing beneath the surface of the Pokémon world. Generation 3 arrived, and with it, a seismic shift in what it meant to be a legendary. This was the Hoenn Expansion. If Kanto and Johto introduced legendary Pokémon as rare, powerful figures tied to specific locations or events, Hoenn threw open the doors to a new scale of mythology. We moved from regional protectors to planetary architects. No longer were we talking about a bird that controls ice, or a dog that embodies lightning. Now we were talking about forces that shaped the very continents and oceans of the world. The story begins with two ancient beings, Groudon and Kyogre. In the lore of Hoenn, these are not merely guardians of a volcano or a sea trench. They are the embodiments of land and sea themselves. According to legend, they clashed in a primordial battle that reshaped the planet. Groudon expanded the continents, pulling rock and magma from the Earth's core. Kyogre flooded the skies, expanding the oceans until there was almost no land left. Their conflict was not a skirmish. It was a war for the definition of the world. And then there is Rayquaza, the third being, who dwells in the ozone layer above the clouds. When the battle between Groudon and Kyogre threatened to tear the planet apart, Rayquaza descended, quelling their rage and restoring balance. This trio, land, sea, sky, formed the first truly planetary mythological structure in Pokémon history. The Weather Trio, as fans would come to call them, represent natural forces on a global scale. Their presence in the games demanded more than just a chance encounter in a cave. They required stories of cataclysm, ancient slumbers, and human interference, and that interference came from two teams, Team Magma and Team Aqua. Unlike the criminal enterprises of previous generations, these organizations had ideological goals tied directly to the legendaries. Team Magma wanted to expand the landmass by awakening Groudon. Team Aqua wanted to raise the seas by awakening Kyogre. They were not thieves or thugs. They were extremists with a worldview, and their actions set the stage for the most dramatic legendary encounter the games had ever depicted. But Hoenn did not only scale up the cosmic importance of legendaries, it also expanded the sheer number of them. Generation 3 added 8 new legendary Pokémon, bringing the total up to 17. That is nearly a doubling of the roster, and within that new roster, we saw patterns that would define the franchise for years to come. One of the most intriguing additions was the trio of Regigolems, Regirock, Regish, and Registeel. These were not elemental forces like the birds or beasts. They were ancient constructs, sealed away in chambers deep beneath Hoenn's surface. And to reach them, players had to solve a puzzle unlike anything before, the Braille puzzles. In the original Ruby and Sapphire, the only way to unlock the chambers was to read a series of Braille inscriptions hidden around the region. You had to translate dots into letters, then follow instructions like dig at the signpost or fly above the sea. It was a test of patience and observation, treating the player as an archaeologist, uncovering a forgotten civilization. And then there was the master of these golems, Regigigas. Though not introduced until the next generation, the concept of a trio master, a stronger legendary that leads a trio, was born here. Regigigas was said to have pulled the continents into place, moving the very land masses across the globe. This elevated the Regi trio from simple statues to pieces of a planetary puzzle. The idea that a single Pokémon could be the creator and controller of 3 others gave the legendary hierarchy a new dimension. It hinted at a chain of command among these mythic beings, with some serving as tools or servants to a higher power. Generation 3 also introduced 2 more legendaries that blurred the lines between myth and mystery, Latios and Latios. These were not part of a trio or a pair in the traditional sense. They were roaming Pokémon, capable of flight and invisibility, and they carried a deeply emotional story tied to the city of Alto Mare in the movies. Their inclusion showed that legendary status would also come from rarity, emotional weight, and a connection to human history, not just cosmic power. And then there was Jirachi, a mythical Pokémon that awakens only once every 1,000 years. It was small, cute, and capable of granting wishes, but its existence raised questions. Was every mythical being a legendary? And what did it mean for a Pokémon to be so rare that it appeared only in special events? Generation 3 cemented the pattern of event-exclusive legendaries, a tradition that would continue for generations. But the true narrative importance of Hoenn lies in how it redefined the legendary role in the games. In Kanto, the birds were optional encounters. In Johto, the beasts were roaming puzzles. In Hoenn, Groudon and Kyogre were central to the plot of the entire game. You could not ignore them. The story forced you to confront them. And when they awakened, the world changed. The weather system in the games literally shifted. Groudon brought permanent harsh sunlight. Kyogre brought endless rain. The player had to navigate a world that had been altered by the presence of these beings. That was unprecedented. The scale of this narrative shift was immense. The legendaries were no longer background lore. They were active participants in the story, threats to the world that required the player, the rival, the champion, and the evil team to act. The climax of Ruby and Sapphire saw you standing before a legendary, battling to stop it from reshaping reality. This was the birth of the apocalyptic Pokémon story, a template that later generations would follow and refine. And beneath it all, the ancient conflict between Groudon and Kyogre echoed through Hoenn's archaeology. The lore tablets scattered across the region told of a time when humans tried to harness the power of these beings. The story of the orbs, the red orb and blue orb, shows that humanity once believed it could control the elements. But as with all things in Pokémon myth, such control came at a cost. The orbs could awaken the legendaries, but they could not command them. They only gave the holder a fragment of influence, a dangerous illusion of mastery. By the time the credits rolled on Hoenn's story, the Pokémon world had changed forever. We had seen regional protectors evolve into planetary architects. We had witnessed the introduction of a trio master concept with the Reiki golems and their ancient braille puzzles. And we had experienced a generation that redefined the legendary roster size and narrative importance. The legendaries were no longer just rare, they were necessary. And yet, there was still one more piece of the Hoenn puzzle that we have not fully explored. The conflict between land and sea was not the only battle raging beneath the surface. There was a deeper war, one that involved the very fabric of the planet's climate and the beings that could unmake it. That war would be the subject of our next chapter, as we dive into the forces that truly govern the skies and the depths. Up next is Chapter 7, The Weather War, where we will uncover the full story of Rayquaza's role and the forces that drive the planet's most violent storms. The Reiki golems introduced a new idea to the Pokémon world, that certain legendary beings were not just powerful creatures, but ancient constructs tied to the very elements themselves. Regirock, Regis, and Registeel were guardians of stone, ice, and metal, sealed away by a master who commanded them. That master, Regigigas, was a force strong enough to move continents. But if you thought the Hoenn region had already shown its hand with those sealed titans, you were only seeing the surface. Beneath the waves of Hoenn's warm seas, and deep within the continent's volcanic heart, there slumbered two beings whose power made the golems look like mere pebbles, and their awakening would rewrite the geography of the planet. Groudon and Kyogre are not just Pokémon, they are the personification of the lithosphere and the hydrosphere. Groudon is the embodiment of the Earth's crust, the bedrock, the volcanic fire that pushes mountains upward. Kyogre is the ocean itself, the endless water that fills the basins and drives the rain. In the ancient past, before humans had a name for the land beneath their feet, these two battled for supremacy. The conflict was not a fight for territory or pride. It was a primal struggle to define the shape of the world. Every time Groudon raised a new continent, Kyogre would drown it beneath a flood. Every time Kyogre expanded the sea, Groudon would crack the earth and drain it into fiery chasms. The result was the planet we know today, a mosaic of land and ocean carved by their endless war. But that war was never meant to be eternal. It was, in a sense, the planetary engine that drove creation. The continents shifted, the tides rose and fell, and eventually, something had to give. The sheer scale of their conflict threatened to tear the world apart. If they were ever to wake again, not as ancient forces acting through millennia, but as living beings in the present, the devastation would be immediate and absolute. That is the catastrophic stakes of their awakening. In the modern era, as recorded in the history of Hoenn, both Groudon and Kyogre were sealed away in hidden chambers. Groudon deep within the magma chambers of a volcanic cave, Kyogre in an undersea cavern so deep that light had never touched it. But seals can break, and when human ambition or ancient prophecy stirs them from their sleep, the weather itself becomes a weapon. Imagine the sky splitting into two. On one side, a sun so fierce that it boils rivers dry. On the other, a storm so vast that it swallows islands. Groudon's power intensifies sunlight to an unbearable degree, while Kyogre summons downpours that could flood the world in a matter of days. In the game lore, their awakening triggers a climatic catastrophe that only one thing can stop. That thing is not a human invention. It is not a machine. It is a third being, older than both, and it lives not in the sea or the earth, but in the sky. Rayquaza is the celestial mediator. It resides in the ozone layer, a place so high that the atmosphere itself becomes a barrier, where Groudon represents the deep earth and Kyogre the vast ocean. Rayquaza embodies the heavens, the thin veil that separates the world from the void. In the lore, Rayquaza's role is to maintain what is called the Delta Balance, a state of equilibrium between land, sea, and sky. When Groudon and Kyogre clash, Rayquaza descends from its aerial domain to end the conflict. It does not destroy them. It forces them back into slumber, a reminder that the sky is the final arbiter of planetary order. But there is a deeper mystery here, one that the people of Hoenn have only glimpsed. The Delta Balance is not just a mythological concept. It is a literal force, tied to the very nature of the atmosphere and the energy that flows between all three beings. In ancient times, humans built the red orb and the blue orb to try and control Groudon and Kyogre, but those relics were mere anchors. The true control lay with the sky, and that sky holds secrets that go beyond weather. This chapter of Hoenn's legend is often called the Weather War, but it is more accurate to call it the birth of planetary stability. Without the conflict, the continents would not have formed. Without the mediator, the planet would have been torn apart. And without the humans who later discovered these beings, the war might have remained a silent geological process. But the legends tell us that Groudon and Kyogre are still there, sleeping beneath the crust and beneath the waves, waiting. One day, something might wake them again, and when that happens, only the sky can save us. As the Hoenn Expansion deepened the franchise's mythology, the games introduced another set of ancient guardians, sealed not by a key or an orb, but by puzzles carved in stone. Their prison was a forgotten desert, their names inscribed in a language that predates written history. Next, we turn to those sealed giants and to the master who once dragged continents into place. Chapter 8, The Sealed Giants. The weather war between Groudon and Kyogre reshaped the world. Oceans rose, continents buckled, and the very face of the planet was scarred by their primal conflict. But Hoenn's ancient history did not end with the calming of those two titans. Hidden beneath the surface, far from the sunlit battles of land and sea, another story was being written in stone and ice and iron, a story of fear. You might know the names Regirock, Regis and Registeel as legendary golems, powerful and ancient, tucked away in puzzle-locked caves across Hoenn. But they are far more than just rare Pokémon to be captured. They are the quietest witnesses to a civilization that once wielded power so immense that it terrified its own creators. These three are not relics of nature. They are relics of fear. The caves where you find them, the desert ruins, the island cave, the kingdom, are not natural formations. They are prison chambers, sealed with elaborate mechanisms. Their doors marked with a script that predates any known human language in the Pokémon world. Braille. The puzzles themselves are a kind of test, a filter designed to ensure that only the most determined and perceptive would ever reach the beings inside. But why hide them at all? What were the ancients so afraid of? The answer lies in the legend of the King of Giants, Regigigas. According to the myths passed down through the ages, Regigigas was the first of the golems, a being of immense strength. It is said that Regigigas moved continents by pulling them with ropes, shaping the very land masses of the Hoenn region. This feat This power to physically drag the land from one place to another is not just a story of creation, it is a story of trauma, because if Regigigas could pull continents together, it could just as easily tear them apart. The ancient people did not worship Regigigas as a god, they feared it as a force of destruction. Regirock, Regis and Registeel were created in the image of that power, but deliberately weaker. They were built as servants, yes, but also as safeguards. The ancient civilization that forged these giants understood unshackled strength is a catastrophe waiting to happen. So they sealed the 3 golems away, and they sealed the Master Regigigas even deeper, in a frozen shrine at the farthest edge of the known world. The environmental storytelling in those Hoenn caves is masterful. Each chamber is a deliberate architectural statement. The desert ruins are a tomb, not a temple. The island cave is a solitary cell, its only occupant a silent statue of ice. The ancient tomb feels like a vault, reinforced by water and rock. The puzzle mechanisms themselves, pressing specific patterns, waiting in specific locations, are rituals of restraint, not of worship. You are not earning the favour of a god, you are undoing a prison lock. And what of Regigigas itself? In the lore, Regigigas is said to have been awakened in modern times, but its first act upon waking was not to reshape the land, it was to sleep again. Its immense power still too dangerous to wield. The legends speak of continental drift caused by Regigigas, and that is not an exaggeration. The very geography of Hoenn, with its jagged coastlines and fragmented islands, may be the scars of that ancient towing. The King of Giants pulled the land, and in doing so, it broke something. The cracks are still there. This chapter of Hoenn's story is often overshadowed by the dramatic weather trio, but it is perhaps the most human legend of all. The Regi trio are not forces of nature. They are weapons crafted by human hands, locked away by human fear. They are the physical embodiment of a civilization's regret. And when you finally stand in front of Regirock, staring at its unmoving form, you are not meeting a legendary Pokémon. You are meeting a history lesson sealed in stone. And that lesson echoes forward to another region, where the cosmology grows even larger, where the very fabric of time and space is woven into the mythology of a frozen lake and a hidden dimension. That is the story of Sinnoh and the cosmic genesis. We left the Hoenn region with the sealed giants, those 3 ancient golems carved from stone, ice and metal, buried by a civilization that feared their own creation. Regigigas, the colossus said to have moved continents, lay dormant, waiting for a call that might never come. That story felt vast, continental in scale. But Sinnoh asks a different question entirely. It does not ask what shaped the land or what ancient power humans once feared. It asks where the land itself came from, where time began, where the very idea of existence was first conceived. And to answer that, we must go back further than any fossil or myth fragment can take us, back to a moment before there was anything at all. This is the boldest narrative leap the Pokémon world has ever taken, explaining the literal creation of the Pokémon universe, not a regional catastrophe, not a war between elemental titans, but the birth of reality itself. And at the center of that story is a figure unlike any legendary we have met so far, Arceus, the original one. The myths of Sinnoh are old, older than the oldest written records in the region. They speak of a primordial void, a state of absolute nothingness. No light, no dark, no space, no time. Just an infinite silence, where not even the concept of emptiness had meaning. And from that nothingness, a single egg appeared. The myth calls it the egg of creation. And inside it lay something that had always been there, even when there was no there, a being of pure undivided essence, Arceus. Now, the Thousand Arms myth tells us that when Arceus emerged from that egg, it was not alone in the sense of having companions. Rather, the act of emerging was itself an act of separation. The eggshell became the substance of the universe, and Arceus, with 1,000 arms, or perhaps 1,000 hands of energy, reached out and began to shape what had been formless. The arms are not literal limbs. They are the forces, the laws, the principles that would govern all of existence. Each arm pulled a thread of reality into being, and so from the void, Arceus created three beings, each one a fundamental pillar of the cosmos. One became the embodiment of time, another the embodiment of space, and the third, a being of antimatter and distortion, was cast into a realm that existed as a shadow of the world it rejected. These three are not servants. They are extensions of the original creative act. The universe, in this telling, is not a place that simply happened. It was made, deliberately, and the maker is a Pokémon. This raises a philosophical question that the games rarely ask out loud, but always imply. What does it mean for a creator to be a creature? Arceus is not an abstract force. It is a being you can encounter, you can battle, you can capture. It has a type, a moveset, a cry. It exists within the same framework as a Pikachu or a Magikarp, and yet, according to its own lore, is the reason that framework exists at all. There is a strange humility in that. The creator does not stand apart from creation. It dwells within it, subject to its own rules. Arceus cannot be understood as a distant god in the sky. It is a being that chose to become part of the story it began. The implications ripple outward. If Arceus created the universe, then all of reality, including the other legendary Pokémon we have discussed, came from that original act. The Groudon and Kyogre that shaped the continents, the Ho-Oh that resurrected the beasts, the Mew that carries the genetic memory of all Pokémon. They are all descendants of that first moment. The Sinnoh myth does not contradict the earlier legends. It encloses them. It provides a foundation that the others build upon, and the void, that nothingness before the egg, is not a place of evil. It is simply the absence of everything. The Distortion World, where Giratina was banished, is often described as a place where time and space have no meaning, a realm of broken physics and inverted gravity. But that is not the void. That is a secondary creation, a pocket universe made as a consequence of the original ordering. The true void is what existed before Arceus even conceived of the egg. It is a concept so vast that the human mind can only approach it through metaphor. The people of Sinnoh did not just worship Arceus. They told stories about the lake guardians, Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf. These three are not part of the creation of the cosmos, but of the creation of consciousness. According to the myth, after Arceus established time and space, it created these three to give the universe meaning. Uxie gave knowledge, the ability to know that something exists. Mesprit gave emotion, the ability to care that something exists. And Azelf gave willpower, the ability to act on that knowledge and emotion. Together, they are the foundation of all sentient life. Without them, the universe would be a clockwork of forces with no awareness to witness it. So what is the role of humans in this cosmic story? The myths do not place humanity as the center. We are part of the creation, but not its purpose. Arceus created a universe where time flows, space expands, and life emerges, and then it stepped back. It did not demand worship. It did not lay down commandments. It simply allowed existence to unfold, and perhaps that is the most profound aspect of its nature. The creator does not control. It creates and then entrusts. The games have given us glimpses of Arceus across multiple generations, but it was not until Pokémon Legends Arceus that we truly walked in a world shaped by its presence. That game takes place in the distant past of the Sinnoh region, when it was still called Hisui, and there the player character is thrown back in time. Tasked with the first ever Pokédex, the story revolves around a rift in the sky, a tear in space itself, caused by the arrival of Dialga and Palkia in conflict. And at the center of it all, Arceus watches. It does not intervene directly. Instead, it chooses a human to restore balance. The philosophy is clear. Creation does not end with the creator. It continues through the actions of those who inherit it. Now, as we prepare to move forward, there is one more detail that ties this chapter together. The Lake Guardians, the Creation Trio, the Egg, the Void, they all point to a single staggering idea. The Pokémon world has a beginning. It was born, and the being that brought it into existence is still there, somewhere beyond the fabric of space and time, waiting for a moment to be understood. In the next chapter, we will look more closely at the three beings that emerged from that first moment of creation. We will examine Dialga, Palkia, and the one who was cast out. We will explore the Distortion World, the nature of time, the shape of space, and the meaning of exile. That chapter is titled The Creation Trio, and it will bring us face to face with the architecture of reality itself. But for now, let the silence of the void settle around you. Before the egg, before the arms, before the universe began, there was just stillness. And from that stillness, something chose to move. The previous chapter ended with Arceus, the original one, who is said to have shaped the universe from a single egg. But creation is not a single event. It is a chain, a sequence of moments that require a framework to exist within. Even a god needs a stage, and the stage upon which all things unfold is built from two unyielding pillars, time and space. Without time, there is no before or after, no cause or effect, no story. Without space, there is no distance, no location, no form. These are not just abstract concepts in the Pokémon world. They are living beings, conscious and tangible, and they have names that echo through the highest peaks of Mount Coronet. Let us consider what it means for a creature to embody time. Dialga is not merely a Pokémon that controls time. It is time. Every tick of every clock, every aging face in every mirror, every sunrise that follows a sunset. These are not phenomena observed by Dialga. They are Dialga's own breath, its heartbeat, its presence stretching across all of existence. To stand before Dialga is to stand before the very current that carries the universe forward. Its roar is not a sound. It is a command that says, "This moment shall pass and another shall follow." And yet, because Dialga is a tangible force, it can also be opposed. It can be captured, commanded, and wielded by a human will. That is a chilling thought, that time itself could be shackled. Palkia is the other half of this cosmic equation. Where Dialga governs when, Palkia governs where. It is the substance that allows distance between objects, the boundary between you and the horizon, the room inside a room. To see Palkia is to see space given a body, its crystalline wings folding across dimensions. When it moves, it does not travel through space. It redefines what space is, bending the lines that separate here from there. Together, these two Pokémon are the foundations of reality, and yet, they are not the end of the story. They are merely the beginning of a deeper conflict, one that reaches its climax at a place called the Spear Pillar. The Spear Pillar is a structure that defies easy explanation. Perched at the summit of Mount Coronet, it is an ancient temple built by some civilization so old that no memory of its architects remains. The pillars rise in a circle, worn smooth by millennia of wind and snow. The sky above it seems too close, as though the atmosphere itself grows thin here, and the stars appear with a clarity that feels unnatural. This is not simply a mountaintop, it is a threshold. The people of Sinnoh believed that the Spear Pillar was the intersection where the physical reality we inhabit meets the divine realm of the Creation Trio. It is a place where the veil between the mortal and the cosmic is thin enough to tear, and it is here that the villain of Sinnoh's story chooses to make his stand. Team Galactic, led by the cold and calculating Cyrus, is unique among Pokémon villains. Cyrus does not seek wealth, conquest, or revenge. He sees the world as flawed, imperfect, chaotic, filled with emotion that leads to suffering and waste. His solution is not to rule the world, but to unmake it. He believes that by capturing Dialga and Palkia, he can control the fundamental fabric of reality, and then recreate the universe in a new purified form, one without spirit or sentiment. This is the most ambitious use of mythology in any Pokémon game up to that point. The legends of Sinnoh are not just backdrop flavor, they are the entire engine of the plot. Cyrus studies ancient texts, learns the rituals, and follows the threads of creation itself to reach the Spear Pillar. He does not want power in the old sense. He wants to become the architect of a new cosmos. The player's journey is therefore a race against a demigod's ambition. You must gather the three Lake Guardians, Uxie, Mesprit and Azelf, because they hold the keys to unlocking the Spear Pillar's gates. These three small silent Pokémon represent knowledge, emotion, and willpower. They are the aspects of consciousness that Cyrus seeks to erase from his new world. By helping them, you are not just catching legendary Pokémon, you are defending the very essence of what it means to be alive. When you finally stand atop the pillar, the sky twists and reality buckles, and Dialga and Palkia descend into the world as if answering a summons written into the fabric of existence. The battle that follows is not just a fight. It is the collision of mythology and humanity. And the climax does not end when you defeat Team Galactic, because for every pair of opposites, there is a third element, a shadow, a distortion, a realm where the rules of time and space do not apply. After the events at the Spear Pillar, the veil remains torn, and from beyond it, a dark presence stirs. This presence is not an enemy in the usual sense, but a consequence of the creation itself. A being that was exiled for being too dangerous, too chaotic, too much of a threat to the order that Dialga and Palkia maintain. Its home is not a mountain or a cave, but a dimension that exists alongside our own. A place where up and down have no meaning and reality obeys no logic. That world and the ancient exile who rules it is what we will step into next. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, I'm curious, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let our global community know. And if you're finding this as mind-blowing as I am, hit that like button to help more people discover this story. From that hallowed summit where Dialga and Palkia were called forth at the Spear Pillar, you might imagine the story of Sinnoh's creation ended in balance. But creation seldom leaves everything accounted for. When Arceus shaped the universe, it drew from light, matter, and existence itself. Yet for every force, there must be an equal and opposite, a shadow cast by the act of making. And that shadow was Giratina. Giratina is the banished third member of the creation trio, the one who did not receive a place in the universe as we know it. While Dialga wove the fabric of time and Palkia stretched the canvas of space, Giratina was relegated to a world born at the moment of creation's reverse, the Distortion World. This was not a punishment in the sense of wrath, but a necessity. The universe required a garbage dump for everything that does not fit within ordered reality. Antimatter, entropy, chaos, the very forces that would unravel existence if left within the normal flow of time and space. And so Giratina became the warden of this inverted realm, a living prison keeper for the raw substance of undoing. But here is where the legend becomes complicated. The Distortion World is not a simple underworld or a parallel dimension. It is a place where physics ceases to exist. Gravity pulls in multiple directions at once. Up and down become choices rather than constants. Rivers of liquid shadow flow upward into skies that are not skies, and the ground twists into impossible geometries. Every step you take in the Distortion World is a defiance of everything your senses tell you. And at the center of this chaos, Giratina moves not as a tyrant but as a guardian. It does not cause the madness. It is the only thing that holds the chaos together. So why is Giratina often called a rebellious figure? The rebellion was not against Arceus' authority, but against the order that excluded it. Imagine being born as the embodiment of a fundamental law of the universe, antimatter, and being told that your very nature makes you a threat. Giratina did not choose to be banished. It was exiled because its existence was incompatible with the stability Dialga and Palkia represented. Yet the Pokémon world's mythology hints that Giratina occasionally rebels against its exile, forcing its way into the normal dimension through weakened points in reality. These breaches are described in ancient Sinnoh texts as cataclysmic events, where the sky would tear open and shadows would pour into the world, warping time and space around them. The Spear Pillar itself was built over a particularly thin membrane between worlds, and it is no coincidence that when Dialga and Palkia were summoned, Giratina was always lurking just beneath the surface. But there is a deeper truth to this rebellion. Giratina is not merely a destructive force. Its role in maintaining the world's structural integrity is critical. Paradoxically, it is the glue that holds the edges of existence together. Without Giratina managing the antimatter and entropy that constantly threatened to flood into reality, the universe would have collapsed long ago. When Giratina forces its way into the normal world, it is often because that balance is threatened. In the games, the Distortion World is accessed only at times when Dialga or Palkia are endangered, suggesting that Giratina acts as a failsafe, a final guardian when the primary pillars of reality are compromised. Visually, the Distortion World is one of Pokémon's most daring feats of environmental storytelling. The designers did not just create a dark cave, they built a realm that forces you to unlearn everything you know about navigation. In Pokémon Platinum, the player character literally walks on walls, flips the world upside down, and solves puzzles by reorienting the camera. This is not a mere gimmick, it is a narrative device. The Distortion World is a place where your perspective must change to survive, mirroring Giratina's own exile, a being that must view reality from an angle that no one else can understand. And what of Giratina's rebellion against its creator? Some traditions say that Giratina once attacked Arceus itself, challenging the decision to banish it. In the movie Giratina and the Sky Warrior, the Distortion World is depicted as a polluted, dying dimension, and Giratina lashes out at Dialga for creating the disturbances that spill over into its realm. The rebellion, then, is not against order itself, but against the imbalance that threatens its domain. Giratina is not a villain. It is a victim of cosmic geometry, forced to live in a reality that is literally falling apart, and its aggression is a cry for stability. As we close this chapter on the banishment and purpose of Giratina, we must consider the quieter forces that hold the psyche of the world together. For every cosmic pillar of time and space, there must be a foundation of feeling, the will, the emotion, the knowledge that gives meaning to existence. And deep within Lake Verity, Lake Acuity, and Lake Valor, three other beings have slumbered long before Arceus even thought of the Distortion World. They are the ones who will shape the next chapter of this story, the guardians of the mind itself. Their names are Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf, and their awakening changes everything you think you know about the creation of the Pokémon world. That story waits for you in the next chapter, where the Lake Guardians rise. Giratina exists in perpetual exile, not as a punishment for rebellion, but as a necessity. The Distortion World is the realm of antimatter and entropy, the counterbalance that prevents the universe from collapsing into static perfection. Without its chaotic presence, the order imposed by Dialga and Palkia would become absolute, and absolute order is just another form of death. But if time and space are the stage on which existence unfolds, what is it that actually makes that existence meaningful? What gives life the ability to perceive, to feel, to choose? That is where three smaller, quieter beings enter the mythos. Beings that do not command cosmic forces, but instead shape the very interior landscape of every conscious creature in the Pokémon world. Far from the Spear Pillar, hidden in three secluded lakes across Sinnoh, dwell Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf. Their names are not carved into the fabric of the universe the way Dialga and Palkia's are, but their influence is just as profound. According to the oldest records, after Arceus gave birth to time and space, it created three spirits to govern the three pillars of the human soul: knowledge, emotion, and willpower. These are not abstract concepts painted onto reality. They are the architects of the human spirit, the forces that turned simple awareness into consciousness, that transformed mere existence into a life worth living. Before they arrived, the world had a timeline and a geography, but it had no heart. Uxie is the being of knowledge, but knowledge here means more than simple facts or accumulated data. It is the capacity for understanding, for memory, for the ability to learn from the past and anticipate the future. Legend says that Uxie's gaze can wipe away a person's memory, leaving them as a blank slate, which suggests that knowledge is not merely given, but also safeguarded by this entity. Mesprit embodies emotion, the full spectrum of feeling that colours every moment of our lives: joy, sorrow, love, fear, anger. It is said that anyone who touches Mesprit will feel their heart fill with an overwhelming wave of emotion, and that this is the origin of love itself. Azelf is willpower, the force that drives action, that turns intention into movement, that gives a creature the ability to resist, to strive, to change its own fate. Without Azelf, there would be no motivation, no discipline, no courage. Together, these three do not merely represent aspects of the mind. They are the very source of what it means to be a conscious being in the Pokémon universe. But here is where Sinnoh's mythology takes a fascinating turn. These spirits are not distant, aloof deities looking down from a celestial plane. They are deeply and symbiotically connected to humanity and to all sentient life. They dwell in lakes that are woven into the geography of the region, accessible, vulnerable, tangible. The ancient people of Sinnoh understood this bond. They knew that as long as the three guardians slept in their watery sanctuaries, the world would retain its spiritual balance. But they also knew that this connection made them a target. That vulnerability is the dark truth behind the Red Chain, a ritual artifact created by Team Galactic in their quest to remake the universe. The Red Chain is not a weapon in the traditional sense. It is a binding tool, forged from the very essence of the Lake Guardian's power. To create it, one must capture Uxie, Mesprit and Azelf and drain their energy. The chain then becomes a leash for time and space themselves, allowing the wielder to command Dialga and Palkia. The horror of this ritual lies in its cruelty. To control the fabric of reality, you first must enslave the very forces that give reality its meaning. You must strip away knowledge, emotion, and willpower from the world and turn them into shackles. The Red Chain is a narrative device that exposes the fragility of the spirit legendaries. Unlike the Creation Trio, who exist in dimensions beyond easy reach, Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf can be found, can be trapped, can be hurt. They are not invincible. They are not gods in the way we normally think of them. They are more like living hearts of the world, and a heart can be stopped. This is why the mythology of Sinnoh is so compelling. It forces us to ask what happens when the very sources of our consciousness become commodities, tools to be exploited for power. The Lake Guardians are the first legendaries in the franchise, whose primary role is not to guard a region or control a natural force, but to safeguard the intangible essence of what it means to be alive. And so as we sit with that question, we realize that the story of Sinnoh is not just a story of creation and exile. It is also a story about the cost of ambition, about the lengths to which beings will go to seize control of the fundamental elements of existence. But even as Team Galactic's plan unravels, even as the Lake Guardians are freed and return to their silent vigil, another legend is stirring in a region far from the snowy peaks of Mount Coronet. A legend about a dragon so powerful that it could not bear to be whole. A dragon that split into two beings to embody a conflict as old as humanity itself. The conflict between truth and ideals. That region is Unova, and its story will lead us to the Tao Trio. We began with the Lake Guardians, Uxie, Mesprit and Azelf, gifting humanity the very tools of consciousness, knowledge, emotion and willpower. Those gifts allowed civilizations to rise, to build cities, to forge alliances. But those same gifts also created something far more volatile, the capacity for disagreement, for two people to look at the same truth and see it differently, for one person's ideal to clash with another's. And in the Unova region, that tension gave birth to a legend unlike any other. A legend not about creation or balance, but about the fracture that happens when human conviction turns against itself. Long before Unova's skyline was dotted with bridges and skyscrapers, the region was shaped by a single, immense dragon. Not a trio, not a pair one being. The original dragon. It was a creature of immense power, its body a union of fire, lightning and ice, and it served a single purpose: to be the companion of a king, or rather of two kings. The story tells of twin heroes who founded the Unova region. They were brothers, bound by blood and by a shared vision of prosperity. Together, they rode the original dragon, using its strength to build the land. But as their kingdom grew, so did the distance between their perspectives. One brother came to believe that the pursuit of truth, unvarnished, absolute reality, was the only path forward. The other believed that ideals, the dreams of what could be, the hope for a better world, mattered more. Neither was wrong, but neither could accept the other's vision. This was no petty quarrel over resources or power. This was the shift toward ideological conflict. The moment when human consciousness, endowed with knowledge and emotion and willpower, turned inward and asked, "What is the right way to live?" And the answer for the twin heroes was irreconcilable. They could not share the throne. They could not share the dragon. And so the original dragon, a singular entity that had once been whole, began to fracture. Its body split, not from an external force, but from the weight of human disagreement. A schism born of two wills pulling in opposite directions. From that fracture emerged two dragons, each a reflection of the brother who had chosen it. Reshiram, cloaked in white, with flames that burn with the intensity of truth itself. Zekrom, wrapped in black, its tail a generator of lightning that sparks with the force of ideals. They were not simply new creatures. They were the embodiment of the brothers' convictions, given flesh and fire and form, and they were mirrors, not just of the heroes who had ridden them, but of the very nature of the conflict. One dragon could not exist without the other, just as truth cannot exist without ideals to challenge it, nor ideals without a truth to ground them. The two dragons flew apart, each taking with it a fragment of the original's power, and they became eternal adversaries, forever locked in a cycle of opposition. But a fragment was left behind. When the dragon split, a third piece remained, an empty shell, a husk of ice and absence. That is Kyurem. It is the leftover, the part of the original dragon that could not commit to either side. The void that remains when a great argument leaves nothing but cold silence. In the mythology of Unova, Reshiram and Zekrom slumber in their respective stones, waiting for a human who will call them forth, a trainer whose heart aligns with truth or ideals. And Kyurem waits too, not for a champion, but for the possibility of wholeness. It is a creature defined by what it lost, a frozen remnant of a time when two brothers could not agree. This story marks a turning point in our journey through legendary Pokémon. Before Unova, the legends were about the forces of the universe, time, space, antimatter, the elements, the creation of life itself. But here the mythology becomes human. It becomes about us, our arguments, our stubbornness, our refusal to see the other side. The Tao Trio, Reshiram, Zekrom and Kyurem, are not gods of nature. They are gods of philosophy. Their war is not for dominance of land or sea, but for the soul of a civilization. And when the dust settled, what remained was not a victor, but a wound. That wound has a name, and it still waits for someone to heal it. Up next, we descend into the ice, into the story of the creature that has been waiting the longest. The one that holds the key to everything that was lost. That story is called the Frozen Husk. The previous chapter ended with the fracture of the original dragon, a being of such immense power that it could not endure the weight of human disagreement. Two brothers, one who valued truth above all else, and another who championed ideals, pulled the dragon apart into Reshiram and Zekrom. But that is only half the story, because when the dragon split, something was left behind, something empty, something frozen. This is Kyurem, not a fragment of the dragon in the way its siblings are, but the husk, the discarded shell, the part of the original dragon that was neither truth nor ideals, but simply the absence of both. In Taoist philosophy, the concept of wuxi refers to the state of nothingness, the void from which all things arise and to which all things return. Kyurem embodies that emptiness. It is not a force of evil or chaos. It is the silence after the argument, the cold that settles when passion has burned out. It is what remains when a divided whole leaves a hollow behind, and that hollow is terrifying. The people of Lacunosa Town know this fear intimately. Their ancestors built high walls, not to keep out wild Pokémon or rival clans, but to keep out Kyurem. The legends they pass down do not speak of a noble dragon or a guardian of balance. They speak of a monster, a creature that descended from the icy wasteland to snatch humans from their homes and drag them into the frozen dark. The Pokédex entries in both black and white reinforce this horror. Kyurem is said to consume the life force of its victims, leaving nothing behind but ice-cold remains. In Lacanosa, mothers tell their children never to venture beyond the gates after dusk, because Kyurem listens for the sounds of the living. But this is not simply a monster story. It is a story of memory and loss, buried deep beneath the earth. Far to the east, along the coast of Undella Bay, lies a submerged ruin known as the Abyssal Ruins. Divers have explored its corridors for generations, but only recently have archaeologists pieced together its true history. The ruins are the remnants of an ancient civilization, a kingdom that predates the founding of Unova's modern cities. Inscribed on its stone walls are fragments of a forgotten language, a script that speaks of a king who sought to wield the power of the original dragon. That king believed he could reunite the scattered halves, but he never succeeded. Instead, he found Kyurem, the empty shell, and tried to command it. The texts suggest that his ambition led to war, a conflict that eventually consumed his kingdom and sank it beneath the waves. The connection between this lost royalty and Kyurem is subtle but powerful. The Abyssal Ruins contain references to a great cold that descended upon the land, a freeze that did not come from winter, but from something far older. Some scholars believe the kingdom's downfall was directly caused by Kyurem's awakening, a reminder that even emptiness has a will of its own. What makes Kyurem so unsettling is not its power, but its incompleteness. Reshiram and Zekrom are whole. They are the embodiment of ideas, of fire and lightning, of conviction and passion. Kyurem, by contrast, is a wound. Its body is made of ice because it has no internal fire. Its wings are frozen because they have no purpose. The Tao Trio is often called the Tao Trio, but Kyurem is the missing note, the silent chord that makes the harmony possible only by its absence. In the games, Kyurem has the unique ability to fuse with either Reshiram or Zekrom, creating white Kyurem or black Kyurem. This is not a mere transformation. It is a desperate attempt to become whole again. When Kyurem absorbs its sibling, it gains the power of that sibling's element, but it also regains a sliver of the original dragon's true form, yet it can never fully reunite both. The split was permanent. The two brothers made sure of that, and so Kyurem waits. In the giant chasm, a frozen crater deep in Unova's interior, it rests in a perpetual state of hibernation. The locals avoid the area, not because of the cold, but because of the feeling that something is watching from beneath the ice. Something that remembers what it was before it became nothing. But even in its emptiness, Kyurem serves a purpose. It is the physical proof that not all legends are about heroes or gods. Some legends are about the spaces in between, the things that were lost and never found, the arguments that could not be resolved. And in that way, Kyurem is the most human of all the Tao Trio. Because what is more human than feeling incomplete? As we prepare to leave Unova and its fractured dragon behind, there is another story etched into the land, not of kings or monsters, but of 4 Pokémon who chose to stand against the cruelty of humanity itself. Theirs is a tale of loyalty, of sacrifice, and of a sword that never stopped fighting. From the terror of Lacanosa Town, we turn to a different kind of legend, one not born of fear or absence, but of noble resistance, where Kyurem embodied the hollow remains of a fractured ideal. The swords of justice represent something almost opposite, a unified purpose, a code of honor wielded against the unchecked march of human ambition. These 4 Pokémon, Cobalion, Terrakion, Virizion, and the young Keldeo, are not gods of creation or destruction. They are protectors, guardians of the wild, defenders of Pokémon who could not defend themselves. Their story begins long before any Pokédex entry or modern battle. It begins in a time when human civilization was expanding rapidly, swallowing forests and plains, pushing Pokémon into smaller and smaller corners of the world. The Swords of Justice are legendaries inspired by human literature and chivalry, but their roots lie in a very real conflict, a war between the natural world and the greed of humanity. In the lore of the Unova region, there is a tale known as the War for the Moor. It is not a grand cosmic battle of time and space, but a gritty, grounded struggle for survival. The Moor, a vast open landscape, was a sanctuary for many Pokémon, but humans saw it as land to be claimed, resources to be extracted. They drove out the native creatures, built settlements, and harvested without restraint. The Pokémon had no voice, no champion, until Cobalion stepped forward. Cobalion, the Iron Will, the leader. With a blade-like horn and a heart forged in justice, he rallied the scattered Pokémon. But one leader was not enough. Terrakion joined, the brute force of the group, the one who could shatter stone walls and break through human barriers. Virizion came next, swift and elegant, striking from the shadows, a symbol of the land's resilience. Together, these three legendary Pokémon led a resistance. They were not merely powerful, they were strategic. They taught the wild Pokémon how to defend themselves, how to hide, how to fight. The War for the Moor was not won in a single battle. It was a prolonged conflict, a series of skirmishes across the contested territory. The humans, for all their tools and numbers, could not break the unity of the Pokémon, and in the end, they retreated. The Moor was preserved, a peace was established, and the Swords of Justice became the eternal guardians of that fragile truce. But the legend does not end there. For generations, the three kept watch, and then came Keldeo. Keldeo was not born into leadership. He was a student, a young Pokémon who sought to learn the ways of the swords. He trained under Cobalion, Terrakion, and Virizion, mastering the techniques of the sacred swordplay that gave the group its name. But Keldeo had something the others lacked, a sense of hope, a belief that justice could extend beyond mere protection. He wanted to prove himself worthy of the title, and so when a new threat emerged, a dark force that tested the very code of the swords, Keldeo rose to meet it. He learned the ultimate move, the secret sword, and in doing so, became a full member of the Swords of Justice. The story of the swords is unique in the pantheon of legendary Pokémon. They are not tied to creation or destruction, not bound to time or space. They are a reminder that legend can be born from the actions of the brave, not just the power of the divine. They show us that heroism is not about being the strongest, but about standing up for what is right, even when the odds are overwhelming. And in that, they echo the very human ideals of chivalry, honor, courage, and protection of the innocent. As the Moor settled into peace and the swords retreated into myth, the world moved on. But the scars of that war and the memory of those who fought it linger in the soil of Unova. And now, as we look toward the next chapter of legendary history, we turn to a region where the conflict was not between humans and Pokémon, but between two brothers. A war that reshaped an entire land and left behind a weapon of unimaginable power. That is the story of Kalos, where life and death are held in the balance by two ancient beings, and where the cost of ambition is measured in centuries of sorrow. The cycle of life awaits. The Swords of Justice stood as guardians against humanity's encroachment, their chivalric code, a quiet warning that civilization's expansion came at a cost. But in the Kalos region, that cost became a wound carved into the very continent, a scar 3,000 years old, still bleeding into the present. Here, the balance between life and destruction was not merely philosophical, it was biological, it was weaponized, and it left behind a king who outlived his own kingdom. Kalos is a region of beauty, rolling vineyards, elegant cities, forests that shimmer with eternal autumn. But beneath that beauty runs a vein of profound sorrow, because this is where Pokémon mythologies take a turn from cosmic forces into something deeply human. The legendary Pokémon of Kalos do not command time or space. They do not embody truth or ideals. They are simpler, more primal. They are life and death in their most literal forms. Xerneas is the Pokémon of life. Its appearance is that of a great stag, antlers glowing with the colours of a forest in bloom. When it awakens, it shares eternal life, not metaphorically, but biologically. Its very presence can heal wounds, reverse decay, and grant immortality to those it touches. Xerneas does not merely represent life, It is a reservoir of pure vitality, a walking ecosystem that could sustain an entire world. And yet life cannot exist without its opposite. Yveltal is the counterpart, where Xerneas gives, Yveltal takes. Its form is that of a massive bird of prey, wings edged with crimson and black, its tail trailing like a shroud. When Yveltal reaches the end of its life cycle, it absorbs the life force of everything around it, turning forests to ash and cities to tombs, before cocooning itself and awaiting rebirth. It is not malevolent. It is a natural phenomenon, the inevitable destruction that makes renewal possible. Together, Xerneas and Yveltal represent the two biological extremes of existence, eternal life and inevitable destruction. But what happens when such forces are not left to nature? What happens when a human being, in grief and rage, decides to harness that power? 3,000 years ago, Kalos was consumed by a terrible war. Historians in the Pokémon world do not record its name. Perhaps it was simply the Great War, because for the people of that era, no other conflict mattered. It was a war of attrition, of suffering, of entire cities reduced to rubble, and at the centre of it stood a king known only as AZ. AZ was not a tyrant. He was a ruler who loved his people, and above all, loved his Pokémon. The companion who had been with him since childhood was a small loyal Pokémon, a partner whose name has been lost to time, though some believe it was a Floette, carrying a flower of extraordinary colour. But in the chaos of war, that Pokémon was killed, whether by enemy soldiers or by a stray blast, no one knows. What is known is that AZ's grief was so immense, though consuming, that he decided to do something no human had ever attempted. He would build a machine that could reverse death itself. The ultimate weapon was a device unlike anything the world had ever seen. It was designed to channel the energy of a legendary Pokémon, specifically the life-giving power of Xerneas, and focus it into a single devastating burst that could resurrect the dead. But to power such a device, the king needed energy on a scale that defied comprehension, so he turned to the other face of that coin. He used the destructive force of Yveltal as a catalyst, drawing on the cycle of life and death to create a weapon that could rewrite the terms of existence. This was the moment legendary power became a tool for mass genocide, because the ultimate weapon did not simply revive the dead. It demanded a cost. To generate enough energy to bring one life back, AZ had to sacrifice thousands. He ordered his scientists to channel the life force of countless Pokémon and humans into the weapon, draining them of their vitality to fuel the resurrection. And when the weapon fired, it did not just restore his lost partner, it unleashed a wave of destruction across Kalos that turned the war into a graveyard. The land was scarred, the forests withered, the rivers ran black, and in the centre of that devastation stood AZ, his Pokémon revived at last, but at a price so terrible that even he could not bear it. His partner returned to life, but when she saw what he had done, she abandoned him. She flew away, carrying that same flower, leaving AZ alone in a kingdom of ghosts. And because the ultimate weapon had bathed him in its energy, he became immortal. He could not die. He could only watch as centuries passed, as his kingdom crumbled, as the scars of his weapon slowly healed into the natural landscape of Kalos. He became a wandering figure, a tall, gaunt man with a mournful gaze, known only as the man who had lost everything. This is the most somber chapter in the franchise's history, because it is not a myth about gods or dragons or cosmic balance. It is a story about grief, and about what happens when a human being is given the power of a god and breaks under the weight of it. Xerneas and Yveltal were never meant to be harnessed. They are not tools. They are the rhythm of the world, the heartbeat of life and the silence of death. To twist that rhythm into a weapon is to commit an act so unnatural that the world itself remembers it, 3,000 years later, in the form of a lonely king who still walks the earth. But even in this tale of destruction, there is a third presence, one that watches from the shadows. Because when the ultimate weapon fired, it did more than kill and resurrect. It released a surge of energy that unsettled something deep beneath Kalos. something that had been waiting, coiled and patient, for the moment when the world's balance would be threatened. That something is not as visible as the stag of life or the bird of death, but it is just as essential. It is the serpent that ensures the cycle does not spin out of control, and its story is one of patience, of judgment, and of a vigilance that has not yet ended. In the wake of the Kalos War, after the ultimate weapon had scarred the land, and the cycle of life and death had been sealed into the bodies of Xerneas and Yveltal, one might assume that balance had been restored, but the truth is far more unsettling, because where there is life and death, there must be something that decides where one ends and the other begins. That something does not think, it does not feel, it simply watches. And when the natural order is threatened, it moves without mercy. This is the story of the Order Pokémon, the silent watcher that maintains the balance between life and death, the one known as Zygarde. The previous chapter left us with the image of a world scarred by human grief and ambition, where two legendary beings embodied the extremes of existence. But what exists between those extremes? What ensures that life does not overflow and death does not consume everything? In the mythology of the Pokémon world, Zygarde is that guardian. It is not a creator, not a destroyer, but a regulator. Think of it as the planet's immune system, a slow, patient force that only activates when the ecosystem itself begins to break down. Unlike the dramatic interventions of Rayquaza in Hoenn or the cosmic battles of Sinnoh, Zygarde operates in the shadows. It does not announce itself. It does not demand worship. It simply exists, waiting for the moment when the balance tips too far. And here we encounter one of the most radical concepts in legendary biology. Zygarde is not a single individual. It is a hive mind composed of hundreds of tiny fragments called cells and a smaller number of intelligent cores. This is a departure from the traditional legendary individuality we have seen so far. Arceus is one being. Dialga and Palkia are singular entities. Even the Tao Trio, fractured from the original dragon, each maintain their own distinct consciousness. But Zygarde is scattered across the Kalos region, and possibly beyond, as countless green and black cells that lie dormant in the earth, in caves, in forests. Each cell is almost powerless on its own, barely more than a speck of life. But when a core begins to gather them, the collective intelligence forms a body. At 10% power, Zygarde takes the shape of a dog. At 50%, it becomes a towering serpent. At 100%, it reveals its true form, a humanoid figure with immense power, a complete expression of the planet's will. This structure is not just a biological curiosity. It is a statement about how the Pokémon world enforces its own equilibrium. Zygarde is not a proud deity. It does not live in a sacred temple or appear in ancient texts as a god of judgment. It is an emergent property of the ecosystem itself, a distributed network of sensors that can detect ecological collapse long before any legend would notice. When pollution, overpopulation, or unnatural disasters threaten the land, the cores begin to assemble the cells. The immune system wakes up, and then Zygarde acts. Why would the planet need such a being? Consider the consequences of the Kalos War. The ultimate weapon did not just kill thousands of Pokémon and people. It disrupted the flow of natural energy on a massive scale. Xerneas and Yveltal are responsible for the grand cycle of life and death, but they are not regulators. They are forces, not law. Zygarde is the law. It ensures that no single force, whether it be the rampant spread of life or the overwhelming shadow of death, destabilizes the system. In a sense, Zygarde is the planet's answer to the excesses of its own legendary inhabitants. It is the check and balance that even gods must respect. But there is a deeper mystery here. Why is Zygarde so little known in the human world? Why do the stories of Xerneas and Yveltal dominate Kalosian mythology, while Zygarde remains hidden? Perhaps the answer lies in its nature. Humans remember dramatic events, wars, miracles, catastrophes. They build legends around the sun and the moon, around creation and destruction, but they rarely remember the quiet mechanisms that keep the world spinning. Zygarde does not want to be remembered. Its purpose is to be invisible, to act only when necessary, and to fade back into the earth when the crisis passes. That is the essence of the Order Pokémon. It is the silence between the notes. It is the steady hand that steadies the ship without ever being seen. And yet, there are hints of its presence in the ancient structures of Kalos. Some researchers believe that the mysterious Terminus Cave, deep beneath the region, is a place where Zygarde once gathered. The existence of its cells has been noted by a few observant trainers, but most dismiss them as mere curiosities. Only when a true threat arises does the world realize that Zygarde was always there, waiting. This is why it is often described as the planet's immune system. Like the biological immune system, it does not attack healthy cells. It only reacts to pathogens. But when it does react, its response is absolute. Consider the ecological collapse that could occur if, for example, the Dynamax phenomenon from Galar were to spread unchecked, or if the ultra wormholes from Alola began to tear at the fabric of reality. Zygarde would be there, assembling its body, analysing the threat. It does not care about human politics or the ambitions of individual legendaries. It cares only about the health of the entire system. In that sense, Zygarde is perhaps the most impartial and terrifying legendary of all. It has no agenda, it has no desire, it is pure function. But what happens when the immune system itself becomes corrupted? There are whispers in the lore of a Zygarde that was once defeated or driven away by a force beyond its capacity. Some tie this to the arrival of the ultimate weapon, suggesting that the weapon's energy damaged the network of cells, forcing Zygarde to retreat into dormancy for centuries. If that is true, it means that even the planet's immune system has limits, and when those limits are reached, something else must step in. That something may lie far beyond Kalos, on a chain of tropical islands where the guardians are not cosmic forces or elemental spirits, but ancient protectors tied to the land itself. A region where the very concept of legend is redefined through the lens of culture, ritual, and the mystery of ultra-space. The answer to the question of what watches when even the watcher falls silent awaits us in Alola, where the island guardians stand watch over a different kind of balance. From the silent, fragmented watcher of Kalos, we now travel across the ocean to a region where the divine does not hide in shadows or whisper from a distant throne. We are going to Alola, a chain of tropical islands bathed in perpetual sunlight and warmed by gentle tides. But beneath that serene surface lies a truth that reshapes everything we think we know about legendary Pokémon. Here the gods are not cosmic abstractions. They are neighbours. They are capricious, territorial, and they walk among their people. Alola's mythology begins not with the creation of the universe, but with the creation of a home. Long before human settlers arrived, the 4 islands were raw and wild, ruled by forces that were neither good nor evil, but utterly elemental. These forces were the Tapu Koko, the guardian of Melemele Island, crackling with electric energy and a mischievous spirit. Tapu Lele, the pink deity of Akala, whose scales scatter healing scales that can both soothe and overwhelm. Tapu Bulu, the verdant guardian of Ula Ula, a being of thick moss and stubborn strength, who commands the growth of forests and the fury of nature. And Tapu Fini, the mist-cloaked guardian of Pony, whose waters hold memories and whose presence can cleanse or confuse. These 4 are not distant overseers. They are active, they interact, they have preferences, moods, and they make their will known. Unlike the silent Zygarde, who waits beneath the earth for the world to tip too far, or the cosmic dragons of Sinnoh, who exist in dimensions beyond human reach, the Tapu are local. They are rooted in the soil of their islands. They patrol their territories, they observe the villages, and they are known to descend into the towns when displeased or curious. There are records of Tapu Koko stealing hats from children, or leaving thunderous laughter echoing through the canyons. Tapu Lele's healing scales have been known to cause uncontrollable growth in plants and even emotions, turning a simple cut into a crisis of ecstasy. These are not forces to be worshipped from afar. They are beings to be respected, appeased, and sometimes avoided. And this is where Alolan culture becomes something entirely different from any other region. The entire social structure, the annual festivals, the selection of leaders, even the way children are taught to behave around certain ruins. All of it exists in response to the whims of the Tapu. The most visible example is the institution of the island Kahuna. Each island has a Kahuna, a human champion chosen not by election or inheritance, but by the direct approval of the island's guardian deity. This is not a ceremonial role. The Kahuna is the intermediary between the people and the Tapu. They lead the rituals, they interpret the signs, and most importantly, they defend the island's spiritual balance. The selection process is as ancient as the settlements themselves. When a Kahuna passes, the Tapu does not simply appoint a successor. Instead, a trial begins. Aspiring Kahunas must prove themselves worthy through a series of challenges known as the Island Challenge. But the final test, the one that truly matters, is the Guardian Deity battle. The candidate must face the Tapu itself in direct combat, not as a ritualistic dance, but as a real dangerous confrontation. The Tapu holds back, of course, but only so much. If the human is deemed worthy, if they show courage, wisdom, and a deep respect for the island's spirit, the Tapu will allow itself to be defeated. In that moment, the bond is sealed. The human becomes the Kahuna, and the Tapu acknowledges them as its partner, its voice among the people. This tradition goes back centuries to the very first Kahunas who stepped forward when the islands were still wild. Oral histories speak of a time when the Tapu were more aggressive, when they would test humans by unleashing storms or causing the land itself to tremble. The earliest Kahunas were not just warriors. They were diplomats, negotiating with forces that could erase a village without remorse. Over generations, a fragile trust was built. The Tapu learned that humans could be useful stewards, and humans learned that the Tapu were not malicious. They were simply powerful beings with their own sense of order. And so, Alola became a place where the sacred and the everyday are woven together. You see this in the architecture. Many homes have small altars facing the island's central mountain, where offerings of fruit or flowers are placed for the Tapu. You see it in the festivals. Every year, the people of Melemele hold a celebration for Tapu Koko, with dancing and electric displays to honor its speed and joy. On Akala, the healers whisper prayers to Tapu Lele before treating the sick. On Ulaula, farmers leave the first harvest at the edge of Tapu Bulu's forest. And on Pony, the fishermen never venture into certain misty coves without asking Tapu Fini for permission. The Tapu are not just protectors, they are the heartbeats of their islands. But this closeness comes with a cost. The Tapu are jealous of their domains. They do not always welcome outsiders, and they have been known to become suspicious of technology or change. When the first modern Pokémon professors arrived in Alola, they had to earn the trust of the Kahunas, and through them, the Tapu. The region's isolationism is not just a cultural preference. It is a necessity born from the understanding that the Guardians do not tolerate disruption. Even today, there are places in Alola where no human sets foot, because the Tapu have made it clear that those lands are off limits. This dynamic sets Alola apart from every other region we have explored. In Hoenn, the legendary weather trio are forces of planetary balance, but they are not involved in daily life. In Sinnoh, the creation trio are cosmic architects, but they are not seen. In Unova, the Tao Trio are ideological symbols, but they do not walk the streets. The Tapu, however, are present, they are felt, and they are active. This is a return to a very old idea of what a deity is. Not a distant creator, but a localized guardian who demands attention and offers protection in return. And yet, even as we marvel at the intimacy of Alolan mythology, we must acknowledge that the islands hold another layer of mystery, because the Tapu are not the only powerful beings here. There are legends of a great light that comes from the sun, and a great shadow that comes from the moon. There are stories of a creature that devours light itself, and of doorways that open into dimensions beyond our own. The Tapu have been the guardians of Alola for millennia. But they are not the only ones watching the skies. Something else is stirring beyond the islands, beyond the known world, and it will not remain hidden for much longer. That story, the tale of the Ultra Space Incursion, is one of the most profound shifts in legendary Pokémon history. It will force us to reconsider the boundaries between dimensions, between light and shadow, and between what we call legendary and what we call alien. But that is a chapter for another night. For now, let the warm breeze of Alola carry you, and know that somewhere on these islands, a guardian deity is watching, waiting, and perhaps if you are worthy, it might even show itself. The Tapu of Alola are ancient and active, deeply woven into the daily lives of the islanders. They grant blessings, test champions, and protect their domains, with a force that is both reverent and fierce. But beneath the surface of this idyllic archipelago, something far stranger was stirring. For all the Guardians did to maintain balance, they could not shield Alola from what was about to arrive from beyond the stars. This is the story of the Ultra Space Incursion. In the shadows of Melemele, on the slopes of a dormant volcano, a tiny creature drifts through the air like a puff of cosmic dust. It has no limbs, no wings, just a soft gaseous body and eyes that seem to hold the depth of the night sky. This is Cosmog, a being so fragile that it cannot survive without a host or a protective environment. Alolan legend speaks of a lost child of the stars, a visitor from another world, and that legend is not myth. Cosmog is not a typical Pokémon. It is an alien, a creature born in the void between dimensions, and it holds within its core the power to become something unimaginable. What makes Cosmog truly extraordinary is that it is not a legendary in the traditional sense. It is the pre-evolution of two beings revered as the sun and moon incarnate. Solgaleo, the beast that devours the sun, and Lunala, the one that calls the moon. They are not just legendaries, they are evolved forms. This breaks every rule the Pokémon world had established. Legendaries were never supposed to have evolutionary lines. They were final forms, eternal and unchanging. Yet here in Alola, the lore tells a different story. Cosmog feeds on light and energy, and when it amasses enough, it transcends into its true form. Solgaleo, radiant and lion-like, is said to blaze through the sky, pulling the sun's light behind it. Lunala, ethereal and bat-like, phases through dimensions, trailing the moon's silver glow. Together, they are the keys to the Ultra Wormhole, a passage into an entirely different plane of existence. Ultra Space. Ultra Space is not a realm of gods or nature spirits. It is a dimension of alien landscapes, of crystalline forests and floating mountains, of impossible geometry and light that bends in ways physics cannot explain, and it is home to the Ultra Beasts. These are not Pokémon in any conventional sense. Their biology is foreign, their behavior incomprehensible. Nihilego, the parasite Pokémon, jellies through the air like a translucent medusa, latching onto minds and pulling emotions to the surface. Buzzwole, the swollen Pokémon, is a muscular insectoid that drains vitality with its needle-like proboscis. And Pheromosa, the listen Pokémon, moves so fast it appears to blur, leaving trails of ultraviolet light. The games call them Ultra Beasts, but the Pokédex struggles to categorize them. Are they Pokémon? The answer is complicated. They share the same game mechanics, but lore places them outside the known taxonomy. They are invasive species from another dimension, and their arrival in Aloha threatens to unravel the very definition of what a Pokémon is. The introduction of Ultra Beasts was a philosophical turning point for the franchise. For over 2 decades, the term Pokémon had implied a creature that could be caught, trained, and understood within the natural order of the world. But Ultra Beasts defy that order. They are not bound by the same elemental rules. They have no known ecology in our dimension. They appear without warning, leaving trails of devastation or confusion. Some characters in the games even question whether they should be called Pokémon. This is not just a gameplay mechanic, it is a narrative challenge. If the universe is infinite, how many other dimensions are out there, and what else might come through the wormholes? At the center of this cosmic incursion lies a being more ancient and tragic than any other. Necrozma, the Blinding One. It is not a visitor like the Ultra Beasts. Necrozma is a native of Ultra Space, but not always a destroyer. Long ago, it was a source of pure radiant light, a celestial body that warmed and illuminated its dimension. The Pokémon of Ultra Space revered it as a god, but then something happened. A cataclysm, or perhaps an intrusion from another world, caused Necrozma to lose its light. It became a hollow shell, a dark crystalline entity that consumes light wherever it can find it. In its desperation, it turned on its own worshippers, draining the light from all life around it. It became a parasite of illumination, a god that had fallen from grace. Necrozma's tragedy is that it does not seek destruction for malice. It is driven by an insatiable hunger, a need to regain what it once was. It tears through dimensions, following the glow of Solgaleo and Lunala, because it recognizes their light as kin to its own. In the games, when Necrozma absorbs Solgaleo or Lunala, it transforms into Duskmane or Dawnwing's Necrozma, a hybrid that combines the two beings into a single terrifying form. And in its ultimate state, Ultra Necrozma, it becomes a being of overwhelming brilliance, a dragon of pure light that nearly blinds those who gaze upon it. The lore suggests that this is Necrozma's original form, but one that it can only sustain for a short time before its light fades again. It is a tragic cycle. God that once gave light, now condemned forever to steal it. The story of Ultra Space is one of boundaries broken. Cosmog, a simple alien, evolves into the legendary guardians of Sun and Moon. Ultra Beasts challenge our understanding of what a Pokémon can be, and Necrozma offers a painful reminder that even gods can lose their way. Alola, with its warm beaches and gentle island deities, became the stage for an invasion from the void. And when the wormholes closed, the region was changed forever. But this was only the beginning. The cosmos is vast and other darknesses stir. Somewhere in the far north, in a region that once slept under a cover of ice and shadow, a disaster much older than Ultra Space was about to awaken. A darkness that did not come from another dimension, but from the heart of the planet itself. That story waits for a darker day. I hope you're as amazed by this as I am. If you want to stay updated on more content like this, make sure to subscribe and join our community of curious minds. Trust me, what's coming next will challenge everything you thought you knew. From the dimensional intrusion of Ultra Space, we move now to a different kind of alien incursion, one that struck a single region with a force so great it reshaped not only the land but the very memory of its people. Alola's legends came from the stars through wormholes, but Galar's catastrophe fell from the heavens like a poison, a star that did not grant wishes, but instead corrupted everything it touched. This is the story of the darkest day, and the truth that was buried beneath centuries of retelling. The region of Galar, with its sweeping fields and industrial cities, carries a history that is both recent and ancient. The phenomenon known as Dynamax, which allows Pokémon to grow to colossal size and radiate crimson energy, is not a natural feature of the world, it is an infection. At the heart of it all lies Eternatus, a creature that is not truly of this planet. Eternatus arrived on a meteor, a fragment of something far older and far more hostile than any known life form. Its body is a conduit for an infinite supply of energy, but that energy is not benevolent. The people of Galar would come to call it the poison of the stars, a phrase that captures both its origin and its effect. When Eternatus first crashed into the land, it did not remain dormant. It leaked that energy into the soil, into the air, into the very lifeblood of the region, and the Pokémon began to swell, to warp, to become monstrous versions of themselves. This was the birth of the Dynamax phenomenon. But it was also the beginning of a disaster that would nearly erase Galar from the map. The darkest day, as it became known, was a period when the poison reached its peak. Eternatus, drawing power from the swirling clouds of red and purple that choked the sky, began to expand uncontrollably. Its form grew so vast that it loomed over the entire region, a skeletal dragon of pure malice. The people had no way to fight back. Their armies fell, their cities crumbled, And in that moment of absolute despair, two figures emerged who were not human at all. One carried a gleaming sword, the other a shield of unbreakable iron. They were Zacian and Zamazenta, the legendary Pokémon who would become the region's saviors. They were not gods in the sense of Arceus or Dialga. They were warriors, ancient beings that had waited, perhaps for millennia, for the very moment when the poison of the stars would return. They had no spoken language, no temple, no worshippers. They were living relics, forged by a purpose that predated human memory. Together, they fought Eternatus in a battle that blackened the sky and split the earth. Zacian's sword could cut through the dimensional threads that held Eternatus together. Zamazenta's shield could deflect the streams of pure star poison that threatened to consume everything. And in the end, they did not kill the alien creature. They sealed it, deep beneath the earth, in a cavern that would one day become the heart of a power plant. But the sealing came at a cost. The energy that had flooded the land did not dissipate. It remained concentrated in certain areas, waiting to be tapped. And the people, grateful for their salvation, but afraid of the truth, began to rewrite the story. This is where the historical revisionism of Galar begins. The true heroes, Zacian and Zamazenta, were not forgotten, but their roles were deliberately distorted. The kings and champions of old, the humans who had witnessed the battle, took credit for the victory. They built statues of themselves. They invented tales of human warriors, wielding the sword and shield, as if those weapons were mere tools and not the actual bodies of the Pokémon who had sacrificed everything. Over centuries, the legend became a fable, a children's story about two noble knights and a dragon. The sword and shield themselves were placed in a shrine, treated as relics of a bygone age, while Eternatus slumbered beneath the ground, still leaking traces of its power into the region's geology. The Dynamax phenomenon was normalized, commercialized, turned into a sport. The true origin was buried, not by a single lie, but by generations of comfortable myth. Yet the relics waited. Zacian and Zamazenta did not die. They faded into the wild, into the slumbering weald, a forest that seemed to exist outside of time. There they remained, watching, patient, knowing that the poison of the stars could not be contained forever. They were not merely guardians of a memory. They were the only ones who could stand against Eternatus again, when the darkest day would inevitably return. And it did return in our own time, when a greedy chairman awakened the alien force and attempted to harness it for his own ambitions. The cycle repeated. But this time the truth could not be erased so easily. The sword and shield were found again, by a champion who understood that the legend was not about humanity's triumph, but about the quiet endurance of two ancient Pokémon who had never asked for thanks. What lies beyond Galar's main islands, in the frozen peaks of the Crown Tundra, is another story entirely, one that digs even deeper into the past, where ancient giants and forgotten explorers left their mark on the land. But for now, the darkest day stands as a reminder that some legends are not meant to comfort us, but to warn us of the poison that still lingers in the stars. And so, Galar's history was one of careful erasure. The true heroes of the darkest day were forgotten, replaced by a simpler, safer story. But history, like the soil of a frozen tundra, has a way of preserving what lies beneath. And it is in the Crown Tundra, the northernmost reach of Galar, that the oldest memories are kept. This is not a land of bustling cities or cheering crowds. It is a silent, snow-blanketed wilderness, where the wind howls through ancient ruins and the only footprints are those of the adventurous few. Yet, for all its isolation, the Crown Tundra holds secrets that predate even the darkest day. Secrets about a king who once ruled, not by force, but by the faith of the people. Calyrex, the High King of Galar. If you have never heard that name, you are not alone. In fact, that is precisely the point. Calyrex is a legendary Pokémon defined by the very thing that threatens all legends, being forgotten. According to the lore scattered throughout the Crown Tundra, Calyrex was once the sovereign of all Galar. It was a benevolent ruler, a being of immense psychic power who guided the land and its people through times of hardship. It could see the future, heal the sick, and command the very plants to grow. Under its reign, Galar flourished, but legends fade, generations pass. The memory of a living king becomes a folktale, then a myth, then a whisper. And as the people of Galar turned their attention to new heroes, to Zacian and Zamazenta, to the spectacle of the gym challenge, Calyrex retreated. It withdrew into the frozen wastes of the Crown Tundra, its power waning with every year that no one remembered its name. By the time the player character arrives, Calyrex is a shadow of its former self. It appears as a small, almost fragile creature, its crown drooping, its eyes weary. It cannot even command the wild Pokémon of the Tundra anymore. It needs help. It needs someone to restore its power. And that is where the bond with its steeds becomes essential. Calyrex does not walk alone. It has two legendary partners, each representing a different aspect of its kingship. Glastria, the icy stallion of raw, untamed power, and Spectria, the ghostly mare of silent, shadowy grace. These are not merely mounts. They are symbiotic partners. Calyrex's ability to reign is intrinsically tied to its connection with one of these steeds. Without a steed, Calyrex is weak, unable to access its full potential. But when it merges with either Glastria or Spectria, it becomes something far greater. A rider and a steed fused into a single, formidable entity. This is the unique rider mechanic. In battle, Calyrex can transform into Ice Rider or Shadow Rider Calyrex, depending on which steed it has bonded with. The two become one. The steed provides speed and physical presence, while Calyrex provides psychic mastery and tactical foresight. It is a union of mind and body, of royalty and loyalty. And in the context of Pokémon lore, it is a rare example of a legendary Pokémon that is not complete on its own. Calyrex is not a solitary god. It is a king who needs a kingdom, a rider who needs a horse. Its power is relational, not absolute. But the Crown Tundra does not only hold the memory of the High King, it also holds the echoes of an even older lineage, the Regi family. You may remember the original golems from Hoenn, Regirock, Regis, and Registeel, the legendary titans of stone, ice, and steel. They were ancient automatons, created by a long-lost civilization to serve as guardians of the natural world. In the Crown Tundra, we discover that the Regi project was never complete. Hidden in the frozen depths are two new titans, Regieleki and Regidrago. Regieleki is a being of pure electric energy, so fast that its body is barely held together by a crystalline shell. Regidrago is the opposite, a creature formed from crystallized dragon energy, a remnant of a species that was nearly wiped out in an ancient war. Their existence suggests that the original civilization intended to create a full set of elemental golems, but stopped before they could finish. And then there are the Galarian variants of the Kanto birds. Articuno, Zapdos and Moltres have always been presented as forces of nature, ice, thunder and fire, but in Galar, they have adapted to a different climate, a different mythology. Galarian Articuno is a psychic type, a sleek crystalline bird that moves with the cold precision of a mind reader. Galarian Zapdos is a fighting type, a long-legged aggressive runner that strikes with martial fury rather than lightning. Galarian Moltres is a dark type, a sinister, shadowy phoenix that spreads fear rather than warmth. These are not the same birds from Kanto. They are regional forms, yes, but the lore suggests they may be separate evolutionary branches, different interpretations of the same primal archetype, shaped by the unique energies of Galar. The Crown Tundra, then, is a sanctuary for the forgotten and the incomplete. Calyrex, a king without a kingdom, waiting to be remembered. The new Regis, unfinished projects of a dead civilization. The Galarian birds, ancient spirits reshaped by a land that refused to let them go. And as you explore its frozen expanse, you begin to understand that legend is not a fixed thing. It is living, breathing, and vulnerable to the passage of time. What is revered today may be forgotten tomorrow, and what is forgotten may one day be rediscovered, waiting in the snow for a new champion to restore its crown. But this is not the end of the story. The Crown Tundra is only one chapter in the history of Galar. There is another land, even farther removed from the modern world, where the past is not just preserved, but actively lived. A land where the people still bow to ancient Pokémon, where the very concept of a Pokéball is a new and strange invention. That land is Hisui, and it holds the key to understanding the true origin of the legendary Pokémon we have spent 21 chapters exploring. How did Arceus first appear? What was the world like before the creation trio shaped it? Hisui will answer those questions, and the answers will change everything you thought you knew. From the crowned Tundra, where a king could be forgotten and lose his power, we travel back to a time before forgetting even had a name. A time when the gods themselves walked the land, not as distant symbols, but as immediate, terrifying realities. This is Hisui, the ancient name for Sinnoh, and it offers us the rarest of gifts. A window into the age of myth, seen not through the lens of modern civilization, but through the eyes of our most fearful ancestors. In the modern Sinnoh games, we encounter Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina as cosmic forces. They are majestic, almost abstract, embodiments of time, space, and antimatter. But the people of Hisui did not have the luxury of abstraction. They lived in a world where the mountains rumbled, the seas churned, and the sky itself seemed to tear open. They did not worship Dialga as the master of a fourth dimension. They prayed to a being who could freeze time in an instant, trapping a village in an eternal moment of terror. They did not revere Palkia as the shaper of the universe. They feared the one who could fold space and swallow the horizon whole. This is the core of what legends Arceus reveals to us. It is a shift in perspective from the omniscient, cosmic view we had in Diamond and Pearl to the grounded, fearful perspective of Hisui's early settlers. The Pokédex entries from that era are not scientific analyses. They are our testimonials. Descriptions written by people who had seen the gods and survived. They speak of Dialga making time flow endlessly, of Palkia distorting the very fabric of reality, and of Giratina lurking in a world that was cast out. The language is not that of a researcher, it is that of a survivor. And then there are the origin forms. In the modern era, Dialga and Palkia in their familiar, almost regal appearances, the blue diamond, the pink pearl, but in Hisui, when brought into their true, unrestrained state, they become the origin forms. These are not alternate forms or alternate costumes. These are the visages that the ancient people glimpsed in their nightmares. Dialga's body becomes a sleek, metallic serpent of flowing time, its head a crown of gears and energy that loops back on itself. Palkia's form turns into a twisting, ethereal dragon of warped space, its arms like shattered glass and its body a spiral of cosmic distortion. Why do they look so different? The lore suggests that the familiar forms in modern times are the results of human interpretation, perhaps a filter that makes them more comprehensible to our minds. The origin forms are the raw, unfiltered truth. They are what the gods look like when no human is there to soften their presence. When a resident of Hisui's Jubilife village saw a flash of light over Mount Coronet, they were not seeing the Dialga we know from the cover art. They were seeing a monster of living time, a creature that could erase your existence before you finished your prayer. The Hisui region also gives us a new piece of the puzzle regarding the forces of nature. For generations we knew of the trio, Landorus, Tornadus and Thunderous, beings that control the land, wind and lightning. But there was always a sense of imbalance, a missing season. In Hisui that gap is filled. Enamorus, the fourth of the quartet, embodies love and fertility, but also the harsh, driving force of spring. She is the one who completes the cycle. Her arrival turns the trio into a quartet, each one governing a facet of nature's temperament. Enamorus is not just a late addition, she recontextualizes the entire group. The forces of nature are not simply random weather spirits, they are seasonal guardians, each representing a force that can be both gentle and destructive. Landorus brings the harvest, but also the earthquake. Tornadus brings the rain, but also the hurricane. Thunderous brings the storm, but also the wildfire from lightning. And Enamorus brings the new growth of spring, but also the flood of melting snow, the territorial rage of mating season. The Hisui people understood this duality. They did not see these beings as benign. They saw them as powers to be appeased. What is remarkable about the Hisui perspective is that it forces us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about Sinnoh's creation myth. In the old games, we are told that Arceus created Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina, and then the late Guardians were born from the same act. The story is neat, almost sterile, but the Hisui records hint at a much more violent genesis. The plates left behind by Arceus are not just artifacts, they are warnings. Each one describes a conflict, a separation, a banishment. Giratina was not simply assigned to the Distortion World. It was cast into a dimension of broken reality, because its nature was too violent for the world that was meant to be. And yet the people of Hisui did not hate these gods. They feared them, yes, but they also respected them. They built shrines, offered tributes, and learned to coexist. This is the lesson that the Hisui chapter teaches us. That legends are not static truths. They are stories that evolve with the teller. The Dialga and Palkia we catch in modern games are not the same beings that haunted the dreams of Hisui's first settlers. We have tamed them, in a sense, or at least our perception of them has been softened by centuries of familiarity. But the origin forms remain. They are a reminder that beneath every legend there is a core of raw, untamed power that once terrified our ancestors. And perhaps that fear is the most honest reaction we can have to a god. When we finally descend into the great crater of Paldea, we will encounter a different kind of ancient mystery. One buried not in the sky or in time, but deep within the earth itself, waiting to be uncovered by modern science. From the ancient perspective of Hisui, we saw the origin forms of Dialga and Palkia, terrifying, raw manifestations of time and space before human stories softened them into the familiar figures we know. That glimpse into a primordial past taught us that legendaries are not static. They shift with the eyes that behold them. But Paldea offers something even stranger, not a glimpse into the past alone, nor a vision of the future, but a place where those two directions fold into each other, like the edges of a crumpled map. The great crater of Paldea is a wound in the earth, a mile-wide chasm that plunges into the heart of the region. For generations, it was sealed off by the Pokémon League, cleared off limits to all but the most authorized researchers. And for good reason, because inside that crater, time itself seems to have fractured. This is Area Zero, a localized lost world where time becomes a legendary catalyst. Not a time machine, something far more unsettling. A place where creatures from eras that never overlapped now walk side by side. When you descend into that abyss, the first thing you notice is the light. A crystalline glow pulses from the walls, from the ground, from the very air. The Terastal phenomenon, that sparkling, gem-like energy that coats Pokémon in Paldea, originates here. And at the heart of it all lies Terapagos, a legendary turtle whose shell seems to hold the power to refract time itself. But the true mysteries of Area Zero are not just geological or even legendary in the traditional sense. They are biological. They are the paradox Pokémon. These are beings that should not exist. Pokémon that appear to be ancient ancestors of modern species, yet carry traits that belong to the far future. The primordial form of Donphan, for example, bristles with fangs and tusks like a prehistoric beast. But its counterpart, a species that looks like Donphan from a distant age of metal and circuits, is built from chrome and wiring, and both of them are alive, breathing, hunting in the same subterranean wilderness. The intersection of modern science and ancient biology in the Paldean wilderness is not a theoretical puzzle. It is a living, breathing contradiction. The professors, Sada and Turo, each devoted their lives to understanding this paradox. One believed the ancient forms were the true originals. The other, that the futuristic forms represented an inevitable evolution. But both were wrong, or perhaps both were right. Because time in Area Zero is not linear. It is a catalyst. It does not flow, it ignites. At the apex of this mystery stand two beings that embody the paradox more perfectly than any other, Corydon and Miraidon. Corydon is the winged king, a creature that appears to be a primal ancestor of the Pokémon known as Cyclizar, but with a build that suggests it once ruled the skies of an ancient world. Its feathers are coarse, its claws are brutal, and its roar carries the weight of a time when survival was a war. But Miraidon is its mirror in the future. The Iron Serpent, a sleek, almost mechanical dragon whose body hums with energy we barely understand. Its skin is metallic, its eyes glow with a cold intelligence, and its movements are precise, almost artificial, yet both are the same species. Both are Cyclizar, separated by millennia that should never meet. The paradox of the Winged King and the Iron Serpent is not just visual, it is philosophical. What does it mean for a Pokémon to exist in two times at once? The professors believed these creatures were not time travelers in the conventional sense. By the unique properties of the Terastal energy in Area Zero, that energy, emanating from Terapagos, seems to reach across temporal boundaries and pull fragments of other eras into the present. It is as though the crater is a lens, focusing the entire timeline of the Pokémon world into a single point. And at that point, the legendaries of past and future become tangible. But Paldea does not rely solely on the crater for its legendary stories. The region's history runs deeper than the chasm, written in artifacts and ruins scattered across its plains and mountains. There are treasures buried beneath the earth, ancient vessels sealed with the blood of kings and the fury of calamities. 4 of them, each containing a spirit of ruin, waiting for the moment they are unleashed. But that is a story for another descent. For now, we linger at the edge of the great crater, staring into a light that bends memory and possibility. Area Zero is not merely a location. It is a statement from the Pokémon world to us, that the division between past and future is an illusion, and that the most powerful legends are not those that command time, but those that live outside it. Koraidon and Miraidon are not rulers of this realm. They are its children, born from the collision of what was and what will be, and as we watch them glide through the crystalline air of that abyss, we realize that the Winged King and the Iron Serpent are not contradictions. They are 2 halves of a single, impossible truth. What else lies buried in the soil of Paldea? What other echoes of forgotten ages wait to be unearthed? The treasures of ruin will soon answer that question, and their answer will be anything but peaceful. And yet, for all the mysteries of Area Zero, the paradoxical time-travelling legendaries of Paldea, there is a darker corner of the Pokémon world that speaks less of nature or creation and more of something deeply human: malice. The treasures of ruin are not born from the earth or the sky, nor from any great cosmic event. They are born from the poison of the human heart. 4 Pokémon, sealed away for centuries, each one a relic of a kingdom's greed, a king's cruelty, and the terrible weight of negative emotion made manifest. The story begins not with a single legend, but with 4 ancient objects: a wooden tablet, a set of sword blades, a vessel, and a set of beads. Inanimate things, the kind you might find in a forgotten tomb or a sunken temple. But these objects were not always empty. They absorbed something. The perish body ability that each of these Pokémon possesses is not just a battle mechanic. It is a lore detail that tells you exactly what they are. They are bodies that have perished, or rather, bodies that were never alive until they became saturated with the worst of human feeling. The 4 treasures of ruin were once ordinary items, but they were steeped in the resentment, the envy, the hatred, and the fear of entire generations, and that corruption gave them life. Consider Wocheen, the Pokémon of the tablet. It is said that this creature was once a set of wooden writing tablets used by an ancient king to record the names of those he punished. Each stroke of ink, each sentence of condemnation, dripped with the bitterness of the condemned. Over centuries, those tablets absorbed so much resentment that they awakened. Wocheen now roams the land, dragging a heavy mossy shell, as if the very guilt of that kingdom has become a physical burden. Its ability, once it faints, causes the opponent to slowly decay, a lingering curse of the past. Then there is Chien-Pao, the sword. Not a single sword, but 2 blades, sheathed in a frozen scabbard. This was the weapon of a tyrant, a king who used it to execute those who opposed him. Every swing, every slash, every drop of blood fed the metal with a cold, murderous rage. The blades became sentient, and now they seek to freeze everything in the bitterness of that ancient winter. Qianpao's presence lowers the defenses of all around it, as if the very memory of that king's cruelty makes the world more vulnerable. Tinglu is a vessel, an ancient container used to hold the earth from conquered lands, a symbol of an empire's hunger for territory. The hatred of the subjugated peoples seeped into the clay, and the vessel grew heavy with the weight of all that stolen land. Tinglu is massive, a slow grinding force that shakes the ground and drains the life from its surroundings. It is the embodiment of territorial greed, a reminder that empires built on conquest leave behind nothing but resentment. And finally, Qiyu, beads. Beautiful, bright beads that once belonged to a cruel ruler who hoarded the wealth of his people. The beads were worn as a sign of status, but each bead had been soaked in the tears and anger of those who were taxed into poverty. When the king died, the beads burned with the intensity of that accumulated fury. Qiyu is a fish-like Pokémon wreathed in fire, its eyes like burning coals, and its mere presence causes foes to burn away in a blaze of dark energy. These 4 Pokémon were not always sealed. They once walked the land, spreading ruin in the wake of their awakening. The kingdoms that had spawned them were themselves destroyed, and the Pokémon continued to wander, feeding on new sources of negative emotion. But eventually, the people of the ancient world learned a hard lesson. They could not destroy these creatures, because they were not truly alive in the way other Pokémon are. They were ideas made solid. So instead, they trapped them. 4 shrines were built, 1 for each treasure, and within those shrines, the Pokémon were contained. But the sealing was not a simple act of magic. It required a sacrifice of memory. The very knowledge of the king's crimes, the records of the empires, were erased from history. The shrines became places of forgetting, their true purpose known only to a few. The treasures of ruin became a cautionary tale, not just about the dangers of hatred, but about how a civilization can bury its own sins to survive. For generations, the shrines stood empty of their inhabitants, until the modern era of Paldea, where trainers discovered how to unseal them by collecting the stakes that held the locks. And when those stakes were pulled, the malice of ancient kings poured out once more. These 4 legendary Pokémon stand apart from the cosmic deities and the elemental forces. They are a mirror. They reflect the idea that the Pokémon world is not just a place of beauty and balance, but a place where human emotion has real, tangible power, where a king's cruelty can birth a monster, where an object can become a god of destruction, simply because it was hated enough. The treasures of ruin remind us that the past is never truly buried. The greed and resentment of empires echo forward, shaped into forms that can only be sealed, never destroyed. And as Paldea continues to uncover its history, perhaps there is another secret still waiting beneath the surface, one that connects the very phenomenon of terastallization to something even older, something that slept at the heart of the Great Crater before any human set foot there. But that story belongs to another discovery, one that involves a turtle-like Pokémon and a crystal of unimaginable power, the true source of the Terastal phenomenon. The legend of Terapagos is a tale that pulls together the threads of creation and transformation in ways no one expected. But for now, the treasures of ruin stand as a warning. Be careful what you let the world feel, because the world might just feel it back. From the treasures of ruin, we learn that Paldea's legends can be born from the darkest corners of the human heart. Malice, greed, fear, and hatred given form. Those 4 cursed artifacts, awakened by ancient kings' sins, remind us that legendary Pokémon are not always cosmic forces or elemental guardians. Sometimes they are warnings, etched into objects by the weight of our own cruelty. But Paldea holds another secret, one that goes deeper than any buried shrine or forgotten tablet. It is a secret locked inside the greatest scar on the region's face, Area 0. If the treasures of ruin are the shadows of human emotion, then Terapagos is the light, the crystalline heart of the Paldea region itself. And to understand that heart, we must descend past the paradox Pokémon, past the time-twisted creatures of Koraidon and Miraidon, into the very floor of the Great Crater. There, beneath layers of ancient rock and glittering crystal, lies something that has always been waiting, something that connects every terrestrial phenomenon across the region to a single primal source. The Indigo Disc expansion of the Paldea story is not just a continuation, it is a revelation. It uncovers the crystalline heart of the region, a place called the Underdepths. This is not a metaphor. Deep beneath Area Zero, there is a hidden chamber, a wellspring of raw terastal energy that pulses like a living heartbeat. And at the center of that chamber, dormant for eons, is Terapagos. Terapagos is not just another legendary. It is the origin of the terastal phenomenon itself. Every terastal orb, every shimmering crown that forms above a Pokémon when it terastalizes, every dazzling explosion of light that changes a creature's type, all of it traces back to this one being. Picture a turtle-like Pokémon, ancient beyond measure, whose shell is not armor but a universe of crystallized energy. That shell, when viewed from above, resembles a star map, a celestial sphere that holds the patterns of all known types. And when Terapagos fully awakens, its shell transforms into a representation of something far greater, the stellar type. Here is where the lore takes a truly cosmic turn. The stellar type is not just another addition to the 18-type chart. It is a new tier of power, a category that transcends the traditional elemental system. When Terapagos attains its stellar form, it draws energy from every type simultaneously, becoming a prism that focuses the essence of all Pokémon into a single radiant force. Think of it as the primordial source, the raw terrestrial energy, before it was divided into the 18 types we know. In a sense, every terrestrial crown you have ever seen in Paldea is a tiny fragment of Terapagos' true power, scattered across the region like shards of a broken mirror. But why was this power hidden in the Underdepths? The answer lies in the relationship between Terapagos and the ancient civilization that once thrived in Paldea, the same civilization that built the Zero Lab, that studied the paradox Pokémon, that sought to harness time itself. They must have discovered Terapagos, perhaps even tried to control it, but the cost of that discovery was sealed away. The Underdepths became a tomb, a place where the true nature of the terrestrial phenomenon was buried along with the secrets of a fallen empire. And yet Terapagos is not a destructive force. It is a neutral, almost primordial being. Its purpose is not to create or destroy, but to hold the blueprint of all types within its crystalline shell. When you finally face it in battle, it shifts between forms, adapting to the type of the moment, as if testing every possible configuration of energy. It is a living, breathing chart of the Pokémon world's fundamental laws. This is what makes Paldea's legendary story unique. Unlike the cosmic battles of Hoenn, the creation myths of Sinnoh, or the war-torn history of Kalos, Paldea's core mystery is a scientific one. It is not about gods fighting over land or time. It is about a natural phenomenon that was always there, waiting to be understood. Terapagos is the answer to a question that has been asked since the first trainer noticed a sparkle on a wild Pokémon in the wilds of Paldea. What is this light? And the answer is that the light is a living creature, older than memory, whose existence defines the very fabric of battle itself. So when you hold a terastal orb in your hand, remember that you are holding a fragment of Terapagos. Every time a Pokémon's type shifts into a dazzling new form, you are witnessing a tiny echo of that ancient turtle's power. The Underdepths are not a dungeon. They are a sanctuary, a place where the source of Paldea's identity sleeps, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover the truth. But Terapagos is not the end of the legendary story. There are other outliers, other beings that do not fit neatly into the patterns of creation, guardianship, or conflict. They exist on the edges of the Pokémon world, often overlooked by the grand narratives, yet carrying mysteries that rival the most powerful gods. The stories of these beings are waiting to be told, and they will challenge everything you think you know about what it means to be a legendary. Those are the stories we will turn to next. We had just descended into the Underdepths, that crystalline vault beneath the great crater of Paldea, where Terapagos slumbered at the heart of the Terastal phenomenon. It was a being that seemed to sit outside the usual categories, neither a guardian of a region nor a cosmic force in the grand creation myths, but something more ancient and still, and that is the perfect place to begin this chapter. Because while Terapagos challenges our understanding of what a legendary can be, there is an entire subclass of beings that have always existed on the margins of the narrative, operating by a different set of rules. These are the Mythical Outliers. The games themselves have never drawn a clean line in the code. There is no official in-game label that says, this one is legendary, that one is mythical. The distinction emerged from how these Pokémon were made available to players. In the real world, the category was defined by distribution events. You could not find Celebi in the tall grass of Johto. You had to attend a special promotion, or later, redeem a mystery gift code. Jirachi was not lurking in a cave on Route 114. It was handed out at Nintendo events, or bundled with a game disc. Victini was given to early purchasers of Pokémon Black and White. These were not encounters you stumbled upon. They were gifts from the company, timed releases that made them feel like secret, fragile treasures, and that scarcity shaped their lore. In universe, these Pokémon are often described as being extremely shy, or existing in a state that is barely perceptible to ordinary humans. They are not tied to the great conflicts that define the regions. They do not appear in the war stories of Kalos, nor in the creation myths of Sinnoh, nor in the guardian traditions of Alola. Instead, they hover at the edges of the world, connected to concepts that are more abstract, more intimate: wish-granting, victory, gratitude, mischief. Take Celebi, the time travel Pokémon. It is said to move freely across the rivers of time, appearing in different eras to bring good fortune or restore ruined forests. But unlike Dialga, who is the embodiment of time itself, Celebi does not command the flow, it rides it, a small green sprite that flits between moments. Its role is not to maintain the cosmic order, it is to heal, to nurture, to offer second chances. In the fourth movie, it even brought a boy from the past forward into the present. A story that is less about the physics of time and more about the emotional weight of loss and reunion. Celebi represents the idea that time can be kind, if only for a moment. Jirachi, the wish Pokémon, awakens from its 1,000-year sleep for only 7 days. During that brief window, the legend says, it can grant any wish written on the tag attached to its head, but there is always a catch. Jirachi's power is tied to the purity of the wish, and the stories often warn that greedy desires can cause it to fall into a deep, dangerous sleep, or awaken something darker. Jirachi is not a god. It is a wish made flesh, a creature that exists to remind us that hope is fragile and temporary, and that cycle of waking and sleeping, of hope and dormancy, places it entirely outside the conflicts of the region. When Groudon and Kyogre are battling for the fate of Hoenn, Jirachi is asleep beneath a glacier, dreaming of the next wish. Victini, the victory Pokémon, is perhaps the purest abstraction. It is not a warrior. It does not hoard treasure or guard a kingdom. It simply brings victory to any trainer it bonds with. In the lore of the Unova region, Victini is said to grant limitless energy to those it befriends, a living symbol of triumph. But notice that it does not cause victory, it embodies the potential for it. It has no agenda, no territory, no ancient enemy. It floats through the world like a good luck charm. And in many ways, that is exactly what it is. A creature whose entire purpose is to bestow the abstract idea of success upon a single individual. And then there is Mew, the first of them all. Though Mew's status as mythical, rather than legendary, is a matter of debate among fans. Mew is the genetic ancestor of all Pokémon, a being so ancient and rare that most scientists believed it extinct. In the original games, it was only obtainable through a glitch, or a special Nintendo event. Mew represents the concept of origin, not the creator like Arceus, but the source, the primordial soup from which all life could be said to have arisen. And yet Mew is playful, mischievous, curious. It does not sit on a throne. It hides under a truck in Vermilion City, giggles and disappears. That mischievousness is a recurring theme among mythicals. They are not bound by duty. They are free to be small and strange and unpredictable. Consider Hooper, the mischief Pokémon, which can pluck objects and even other legendary Pokémon through its rings from across vast distances. Hooper has no grand purpose. It does not maintain balance or guard a realm. It causes chaos for the joy of it, and in that chaos, it reveals a truth about the mythical category. These beings are the wild cards of the Pokémon world. They are not part of the Pantheon, because they do not belong to any system. They are outliers by design. So why does the franchise go out of its way to separate them? Partly because the games needed a way to reward dedicated players with exclusive content. But in the lore, that separation makes sense. The cosmic forces, Dialga, Palkia, Gruden, Kyogre, Xerneas, Yveltal, they are all part of a structure. They hold the world together. They fight for dominance. They are the pillars of reality. The mythical outliers, by contrast, do not hold anything. They drift. They grant wishes. They travel through time on a whim. They are not responsible for the survival of the planet. They are responsible for something much more human. The flicker of hope, the sudden stroke of luck, the moment of unexpected joy. And perhaps that is why they are so beloved. When you finally receive a Celebi from a mystery gift, it feels less like capturing a god, and more like being entrusted with a secret. You are not subduing a force of nature. You are meeting a being that chose to appear just for you. That intimacy is absent from the grand conflicts of the legendaries. It is a quieter kind of wonder. As we step back from these singular, elusive creatures, we begin to see the full shape of all the beings we have discussed across these chapters. Patterns emerge, themes repeat, and in that repetition, we find the true architecture of the Pokémon world. A structure that has been hiding in plain sight, waiting to be mapped. That is what we will trace next. The patterns that connect every legendary we have met, and the one invisible thread that ties them all together. And so we leave the mythicals behind. Those wish-granting, time-traveling outliers who exist more as legend than as game mechanic, to step into the framework that actually holds the legendary world together. Because if you've played through multiple generations, you've felt it, the patterns, the way these creatures arrange themselves into trios, duos, and that one stabilizing figure who shows up in the third version, not random. It's storytelling architecture, designed to teach you something about the world before you even read a single Pokédex entry. The trio structure is the oldest trick in the book. 3 birds, 3 beasts, 3 golems, 3 fairies, 3 swords of justice. But look closer. Each trio isn't just a set of 3 powerful creatures. They're a relationship. The legendary birds of Kanto were almost accidental. They lived in distant caves, towers, and islands, with no story connecting them beyond their rarity. They were more like treasure than mythology. But then came Johto, and the burned tower gave us a trio with a cause. 3 Pokémon that died in a fire and were resurrected by Ho-Oh into Raikou, Entei, and Suicune. Suddenly, the trio had a shared origin, a shared trauma, and a shared purpose: to roam the region as living reminders of a disaster. That pattern deepened in Hoenn. Groudon and Kyogre weren't just rare. They were forces of nature. Land versus sea. Expansion versus erosion. And then Rayquaza appeared, not as a third wheel, but as the stabilizer. The one who stops the fight before it destroys the world. That's the template that will echo through every generation after. A pair of opposites, and a third version that represents balance, mediation, or completion. In Sinnoh, it's Dialga and Palkia, with Giratina as the banished third. The antimatter realm, the Distortion World, the space where creation's leftovers went. In Unova, it's Reshiram and Zekrom, born from the original dragon. with Gyurem as the hollow shell that remains when truth and ideals split apart. In Kalos, Xerneas and Yveltal are life and death, and Zygarde is the ecological balance that watches from below. In Alola, Solgaleo and Lunala are sun and moon, and Necrozma is the light eater that steals their radiance. Galar gives us Zacian and Zamazenta, sword and shield, with Eternatus as the invader they must unite to stop. Do you see it? The third version, Stabilizer, is never just another legendary. It's the narrative key. It's the thing that turns a conflict into a lesson. Rayquaza doesn't choose sides, it restores the sky. Giratina doesn't rule over time or space, it governs the space between. Gyurem isn't truth or ideals, it's the consequence of division. Zygarde doesn't create life or destroy it, it maintains the planet's cellular order. These stabilizers teach us that balance isn't a passive state, it's an active force, often as powerful as the extremes it contains. And that's the deeper purpose of legendary Pokémon in these games. They aren't just boss fights or collection trophies, they are vehicles for philosophy. Generation after generation, the developers use these creatures to ask the player to consider real-world questions. In Hoenn, you're not just stopping Team Aqua or Magma, you're confronting the consequences of unchecked environmental manipulation. Garudin and Kyogre represent the catastrophic power of climate and geology when humans try to seize control of natural systems. Rayquaza isn't just a dragon, it's a reminder that some forces are beyond human management, and that harmony requires letting go. In Sinnoh, the questions become metaphysical. What is time? What is space? What happens to the parts of reality that don't fit into our neat categories? The Lake Guardians, Uxie, Mesprit as Elf, are knowledge, emotion and willpower, the very building blocks of consciousness. To catch them is to reflect on what makes you you. And Arceus, the creator, forces the player to confront the origin of all things. It's no longer about weather or fire, it's about cosmology. This is the power creep of lore that defines the franchise. In Generation 1, you caught a bird in a cave. In Generation 4, you captured the literal creator of the universe. That escalation isn't just power fantasy, it's storytelling. The game started small, with local myths like the Burned Tower, and expanded outward, into the stars, into alternate dimensions, into the very fabric of time. Each generation adds a new layer to the mythology, but never fully rewrites what came before. The birds still fly in Kanto, the beasts still roam Johto, but now you know they are part of a larger, interlocking cosmology, where every trio and every duo is a fragment of a bigger truth. And what is that truth? That Pokémon is teaching you how to think about the world. The games use legendaries to explore environmentalism, history, and philosophy, because those are the things that shape human civilization. In Kalos, the ultimate weapon and the war that spawned Xerneas and Yveltal are not just fantasy, they're an allegory for how technology, grief, and ambition can create weapons that scar the land for millennia. In Unova, the split between truth and ideals dramatizes a political conflict that feels timeless. In Paldea, the paradox Pokémon, Corridon and Miraidon, force you to ask whether the past and future can even be trusted, or whether they're just stories we tell ourselves. The patterns of the Pantheon are not coincidences, they are deliberate choices that build a world you can believe in. A world where every legendary has a reason for existing beyond being a rare encounter. A world where the act of catching them is also an act of understanding. And as we look toward whatever comes next, we have to wonder, what new pattern will emerge? What lesson will the next generation ask us to learn? Because the Pantheon is never complete. There will always be another trio, another duo, another stabilizer waiting to be discovered, and another truth about our own world hiding inside theirs. And soon, we'll explore exactly where this mythology is heading, and what it means for the future of legendary Pokémon. We have traced the patterns of the Pantheon across 9 generations, watching legendary Pokémon evolve from rare, powerful creatures into cosmic forces, philosophical embodiments, and living myths. We have seen the Trios, the Duos, and the Stabilizers, the environmental allegories, and the ancient wars. Every region builds upon the last, adding new layers to a mythology that now spans creation, time, space, life, death, truth, ideals, and even the boundary between dimensions. But if we step back and look at the trajectory, a clear question emerges. Where does the legend go next? What frontier is the franchise preparing to explore? And how will the next generation of legendary Pokémon redefine what we think we know about this universe? The clues are already scattered across the games, hidden in flavor text, in the designs of recent legendaries, and in the increasingly cosmic scale of the stories. Generation 7 opened the door to Ultra Space, a realm that exists beyond the normal dimensions, home to beings like Necrozma who consume light and Ultra Beasts that do not follow the rules of our world. Generation 8 brought Eternatus, a creature that fell from the sky and triggered the Dynamax phenomenon, linking legendary power directly to a planetary scale event that shaped an entire region's history. Generation 9 gave us Area 0, a crater where the past and future collide, and Terapagos, a turtle-like entity that is the source of the Terastal phenomenon, a power that changes the very typing of Pokémon. Each step pushes the boundaries further outward, away from the familiar terrestrial myths and towards something larger. When you look at this pattern, 3 frontiers seem inevitable: space, the deep ocean, and alternate realities. Space has always been present in the background. Deoxys is explicitly an extraterrestrial Pokémon, a DNA virus from a meteor. Clefairy and the Clefable line are implied to be lunar in origin, but we have never had a full region built around the vacuum of space itself, or a legendary that controls the void between stars. The games have played with cosmic imagery through Solgaleo and Lunala, the sun and the moon, and through Necrozma's light-stealing hunger. But there is still room for a being that represents the cold emptiness of space, or a sentient nebula, or a living black hole. Imagine a legendary whose domain is gravitational forces, bending light and matter, or a trio that governs the phases of celestial bodies. The franchise could finally visit a space station, an asteroid, or even the moon. The lore is ready. The technology of the games is ready. It is only a matter of time. The deep ocean remains one of the most unexplored frontiers in both our world and the Pokémon world. We have Kyogre, the embodiment of the sea, but Kyogre is more about the force of the ocean itself, the expansion of the waters, than about the depths. We have never seen a legendary that dwells in the abyssal trench, where pressure would crush most Pokémon and light never reaches. The concept of a deep-sea ecosystem, with legendaries adapted to complete darkness and extreme pressure, is rich with potential. The franchise could explore the Marianas Trench, equivalent of the Pokémon world, where ancient creatures slump, perhaps tied to the planet's core or to geothermal vents that connect to the very heart of the Earth. Such a legendary might be the counterbalance to Rayquaza, not in the sky but in the depths, a guardian of the lowest layer. It would be a different kind of power, silent, patient, immense. Alternate realities are perhaps the most exciting frontier, because Generation 7 already gave us a taste. Ultra Space is a multiversal hub, and we have seen alternate versions of characters, like the Falas and the alternate dimension of Pokémon in the anime's Mirage Pokémon episodes, but the games have only scratched the surface. What if a future region is itself an alternate reality? A world where the known legendary Pokémon never existed or took different forms? What if we meet a version of Dialga that rules a timeline where time flows backward? Or a Giratina that was never banished and instead became the primary god of a distortion world that is now the normal world? The possibilities multiply when you treat reality itself as a flexible concept, and legendary Pokémon as the only beings that can perceive or cross those boundaries. A generation built around sliding between parallel worlds, with legendary Pokémon that represent the seams between dimensions, would be the ultimate expansion of the mythology. But beyond predicting the next frontier, we have to ask why these figures have endured in the hearts of players for over 3 decades. The answer lies not in their power, but in their meaning. Legendary Pokémon are not just strong creatures you catch at the end of the game. They are the embodiment of ideas that resonate with us on a fundamental level. Groudon and Kyogre are about the balance of nature, the tension between land and sea, a struggle that mirrors real-world environmental concerns. Dialga and Palkia are about the nature of time and space, concepts that philosophers and scientists have debated for millennia. The legendary beasts of Johto are about resurrection and mercy, a story of tragedy transformed into hope by a rainbow-winged phoenix. Xerneas and Yveltal force us to confront life and death. The Tao Trio of Unova asks us to choose between truth and ideals, a conflict that is deeply human. Every time a new region is announced, we anticipate the legendary Pokémon as much as we anticipate the starters. They are the capstone of each journey, the reward for exploration, the final piece of the puzzle that makes the region's story feel complete. They are also the most personal connection we have to the lore. When you catch a legendary, you are not just adding a powerful Pokémon to your team. You are becoming part of its story. You are the one who calmed the raging forces of nature, who stopped the collapse of time and space, who sealed away the ancient evil. You are the hero that the legends were waiting for. And that is why we continue to chase the legend in every new region. Because the legend is not really about the Pokémon. It is about the journey, the mystery, the feeling that there is something greater out there, waiting to be discovered. It is about the child who first stood in front of the legendary birds in the Seafoam Islands, or who saw Ho-Oh fly across the screen at the end of the anime's first episode, or who read the Burning Tower story and imagined a tower in flames and 3 noble creatures purified into eternal guardians. Each generation gives us a new myth to unravel, a new shrine to find, a new ancient text to decode. And as long as the franchise continues, we will always have that. So what comes next? Perhaps a region that combines all 3 frontiers. A story that begins on a space station, descends into an abyssal ocean trench, and ends with the revelation that the space station and the trench are connected to an alternate reality where the rules of physics are different, or perhaps something completely unexpected. The beauty of legendary Pokémon is that they can be anything. They are the blank canvas on which the developers paint their most ambitious ideas. As we look to the future, we can be confident that the next legendary will surprise us, challenge us, make us believe in the impossible one more time. And with that, we come to the end of this journey through the complete history of legendary Pokémon. From the first rare birds to the crystalline heart of Paldea, from the burned tower to the Distortion World, we have traced the evolution of a mythology that is now as rich and complex as any ancient mythology in our own world. These creatures are more than collectibles. They are stories, and they will continue to be told for as long as people play these games. Thank you for staying awake or for falling asleep as we explored this world together. Good night, and may the legend always find you. What did you think of this journey? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this changed your perspective or taught you something new, consider subscribing for more mind-expanding content. And if you know someone who would find this as fascinating as you did, share it with them. These are the kind of conversations that matter.